Mr. Colonel, so on this image, this is a good one. I know that the Delo lofts exceeded the units per acre, right, when they were originally proposed. Knowing that a zoning adjustment is not a PUD and there's no guarantee of any of this happening, the area that we're just talking about right now for the zoning adjustment, was there a calculation based on the concept of the units per acre just for that location?
Yes, so we did look at that. We looked at the,
Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Louisville, Colorado City Council meeting of Monday, October the 2nd. I'm calling meeting order, and we're going to do a roll call in here in a second. But first, I want to let everybody know that Councilor Most is on Zoom, so she's remote, as well as the city manager, Jeff Durbin, and the deputy city manager, Sama Fox. With that, if you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
We need to take a roll call.
Oh, thank you.
Mayor Maloney,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey,
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton. Here. Councilmember Hefner,
Here.
Councilmember Lay,
Here.
Councilmember Most.
Thank you.
Here. And just so everybody knows, my Wi-Fi is a little sketchy, so I'm going to turn my video off. Hopefully that will allow me to hear everything and contribute.
Thank you, Councilor Most, and thank you, City Clerk, for keeping me in line. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next is public comments on items not on the agenda and items on the consent agenda. This is a chance for anyone to speak on any item not on the agenda or any item on the consent agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and if you're a Louisville resident. Anyone in the chambers? Public comments on items not on the agenda or the consent agenda? Mr. Cooperman.
Thanks. All right, Josh Cooperman. I live in Louisville. Wanted to make a comment about boards and commissions, given that later in the agenda there's some considerations of those, but my comment is not directly about those items. At least last year, the City Council took recommendations from boards and commissions about possible work plan items. And so far in the work planning process this year, there does not seem to have been an opportunity for boards or commissions to weigh in, which I think is not great. I think that one of the reasons that the City Council is considering some updates to how the boards and commissions are organized and so forth is to try to provide better liaising with the boards and commissions, and I felt that asking them for recommendations on the work plan was a good way to liaise. And in particular, at the last LSAB meeting, the indication I got from our staff liaison, Kayla Betzold, was that we would not be asked for ideas about the work plan this year. So I just wanted to bring that up. That's really it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone on Zoom? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anyone have any changes or motions on the consent agenda? Anybody want to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you. Next is council informational comments on pertinent items not on the agenda. Does anyone have anything? Mayor Pro Tem, did I see your hand go up?
So there are a couple of things that I just wanted to mention briefly. First is that October 7th, this weekend, is National Ageism Awareness Day. Just want to make everyone aware that people do get older if they're fortunate, and we would like to take care of them. Second thing is Commuting Solutions is doing a lot of good stuff right now, partnering with the state and the county, getting transportation through, and looks like they might even end up getting some kind of passenger rail, but can't promise anything yet. And the third thing was talking about the ballots for the election coming up. A lot of the people that were fire survivors did not get a ballot mailed to their home. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that they can come to City Hall, to Meredith's office, and pick it up and still vote. And you have until 7 o'clock tomorrow evening to do that. And then that will happen again for the November election. So just want to make sure everyone knows that they can come and get their ballot if it didn't get mailed to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the city manager's report. City Manager Jeff Durbin has a report.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start off by saying this is the first time in my career that I've not been sitting in the room during a city council meeting, so this is very odd and awkward for me. Hopefully you can hear me all right. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Austin. Like Councilmember Most, I don't have the best Wi-Fi, and I definitely don't have the best lighting either, but I did want to check in and let you know that I am here. I wish I was there, and I'm here. We had submitted for, well, I'm at the International City Manager Conference here in Austin. It's an annual conference. We had submitted early this year to do a presentation about the Marshall Fire and lessons learned, and try to pay it forward with our city manager friends across the country and nation with lessons that we've learned in Louisville. And we did a presentation here. It was very well received. Somebody told me afterwards, did you look around the room? Nobody was on their phone. They were all sitting there with their jaws kind of open, watching the pictures and hearing the stories that we told about our experiences with the fire. So really proud of our work in doing that and sharing our stories. Let's see what else. Yeah, I guess that's probably about it. It's I'll be coming back tomorrow. I initially was coming back. I'm coming back tomorrow afternoon. I was going to be at the council meeting tomorrow night, but we had to move the council meeting to today because of the election tomorrow. And then the mayor and I actually talked about maybe we move the meeting to Wednesday instead of Monday. But the city is getting an award at Dr. Cog for all of our work on the Marshall Fire on Wednesday night. So we have to be there for that. So my apologies for not being there, but I'm really proud of the work that we got to do and share with the city manager community across the country. I actually had some questions from people, attendees from China and England and across the United States. So thanks for letting me do this remote.
Thank you, and you're coming in loud and clear, so it appears your Wi-Fi is fine at this point in time. We're going to move on to regular business. First up is ordinance number 1858, series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of Louisville's Municipal Code by the addition of a new chapter 17.26 titled Outdoor Lighting, and this is the second reading, and we have a staff presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members.
Opening the public hearing. Thank you.
All right, now we're ready. Okay, and I would only add that public notice has been met as required for this item. So I'm going to start my presentation with a little bit of background why this is here before you tonight. So first of all, this was most recently on the City Council work plan in 2021, and that is actually where some of the research and community engagement started, but then of course was put on hold due to the Marshall Fire. So it's back on the work plan this year. And so what is dark sky lighting? So put simply, dark sky lighting is lighting that is directed toward the ground and not up at the sky. But of course, it's slightly more complicated than that. And I actually just want to pause. Is everybody able to actually read these slides, or should we dim the lights? As I'm having a trouble. So, awesome. Thank you. I'm not super great with low contrast.
Is that a funny joke about glare?
Yes, it is. This is a setup. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, so now we can see better because we have more directed lighting. So dark sky lighting is useful, right? So it's intentionality with your lighting, making sure that you know what the lighting is for and implementing it for that purpose. It also is on the warmer end of the color spectrum. So when you read about the correlated color temperature, the CCT that's expressed in Kelvin, in general, the warmer side of that spectrum, so the lower the Kelvin, is better for wildlife, it's better for human sleep patterns, also can be better for safety and glare. And then the cooler side is the higher Kelvin. Also intentional light levels, so not necessarily dim lighting, but just intentional for what the use is and what the context of the area is. And then finally, targeted lighting. So again, that's directed downward and meant to actually be illuminating what you're trying to see. So you can see a really good illumination, my goodness, a good example of that on the far right. So on the left of that image is just a totally fully non-compliant lighting. The light is going everywhere. And then you sort of move to the right and you can see it's a warmer color and it's directed fully downward toward the ground. So there are a number of different benefits to dark sky lighting, and sort of the most famous are to curb light pollution, right? So all of that extra sky glow that has negative impacts sort of brings the lighting back down to earth, and then also can increase access to the night sky. But even if you don't hit those targets that are probably easier to hit at a regional approach, you can also experience enhanced security, again, from the direction of the lighting and the improved the lower glare. Also can see a reduction of energy usage, improvement for human sleep. So I don't know if any of you live in an apartment or multifamily, have that lighting directed from the parking lot right into your apartment complex. I'm totally not speaking from experience of last night, but that's definitely something that can be a benefit of dark sky lighting, reducing those types of moments. And then also, of course, there are benefits for wildlife and for insects. I'll also talk a little bit about the outreach that got us here. So it's really been an iterative process. We had multiple internal drafts among city departments. That was police, open space, facilities, planning, sustainability, of course. I might even be forgetting some. So we went back and forth with our different lenses, and then we brought a draft earlier this year for public review. We posted it online a few weeks prior to an open house, and then at that open house, we got a lot of feedback, redrafted, sent it back out, and then got a lot more comments, redrafted, sent it to Planning Commission. Planning Commission asked us to revisit some things, revisited some things, and here you are with the fourth draft tonight. And so I think that's actually made it a lot stronger. It's gotten a lot of different perspectives on it. And then just sort of on the right, you can see we also, in addition to the iteration, we also tried to have a number of different opportunities for people to engage. So we went to events to let people know that this was happening. We held an open house, of course. We had a survey that got over 200 respondents, 2 surveys actually. And so that's just sort of to give you the background of kind of how we're here. And the other thing I would say is, we also emailed people who had signed up to learn more about the project or to kind of just stay in touch to get their comments at each stage of the process. In fact, I actually got in trouble with IT because I was emailing so many people, they thought that I was a spam account. So there you go. So in terms of the lighting regulations in this ordinance, so this ordinance would apply both to residential and non-residential properties. That basically means all uses in the city. It would apply to private and public properties, so city facilities would be affected by this ordinance. However, it does exclude streetlights. Those would not be affected by this ordinance. It requires fully shielded fixtures in almost all cases, also has a limitation of 3,000 Kelvin as the maximum or below. And then it also has different brightness levels, so caps on lumens depending on the area of the city. There are also trespass limitations on adjacent down zones. And I'll just take a moment to describe this a little bit so you can see up at the top right, that's sort of illustrating what trespass is. It's not, and we've had this discussion a number of times, it's not can you see the light from a neighboring property, it's is the light actually shining onto the property. And in the ordinance, we define this as being measurable by foot candles. I think it's like 0.1 foot candle at the property line and at grade. So, that can also differ depending on where you are actually taking the measurement. So we've tried to be as specific as possible. So we're very clear about what the trespass actually is. And then in terms of, we also have uniformity requirements and what shows up as a minimum and maximum foot candle table. This is for non-residential only. And this is really in response to, enhanced security and making sure that we are putting into practice what our police department really wants to see, which is crime prevention through environmental design, the CPTED. And so that piece of the ordinance really was done in conjunction, in particular, with the police department. And basically what that means is that, any lighting that you show on a lighting plan, that you're not creating really bright pockets and really dark pockets right next to each other, because that can be a security issue, it can be a safety driving and walking and all that, right? It's the glare issue that we were just laughing about earlier. It can be very difficult for eyes to kind of transition between the dark and the light. And then finally, there are a number of exceptions that are such as for holiday lighting, for outdoor decor lighting, such as string lighting. And in general, there are some outright full exceptions, but in most cases, this is sort of carve-outs for specific regulations for specific types of lighting. So I'll get a little bit more into that in a minute. But in terms of sort of a general analysis of why have we put the ordinance together this way, lumens, CCT, and foot candles, those are all pretty standard regulatory mechanisms. We've also tried to ensure that these are all things that are measurable at staff review, whether at building permit or development review, but then also have something that we can actually measure for compliance in the field, which would be those foot candle measurements. In terms of the trespass, staff finds that this would help mitigate the impact of higher, more intense uses on those lower, less intensive use areas. And then I've already sort of stated the safety considerations that went into the uniformity section and the minimum and the maximum for those foot candles. And then I'll also say, we do have these carve-outs, and this has gotten a number of public comments about decorative and party lighting. And I'll just say that the intent here is to kind of try to capture some flexibility with different types of lighting, right? Because you have a very different relationship in purchasing and using a light that you adhere to your building, right, than a string of party lights. But in general, we have, those are allowed to be, they don't have to be fully shielded, which sort of makes sense if you imagine what a party light is, right? They do have to be off by a certain time. And in addition, they have to be near human activity areas, which we sort of define in the code to try to capture places where people are actually using the light, such as an outdoor patio or something like that, right? But not necessarily just string lights up around your fence, because that's not an activity area. So that's sort of why we're trying to both mitigate the negative impacts of that type of lighting, but also provide flexibility for people who are, using that lighting for various reasons. On to compliance. So first and foremost, this ordinance would apply to all new construction and all replacement lighting. So then in addition, in terms of compliance, we're looking at bringing non-conforming lighting that's existing that otherwise would not change, right? That doesn't need to be replaced or isn't part of a new construction project, trying to bring that into compliance. So the triggers that we are proposing are for residential, that 25%, when 25% or more of the structure is altered, that requires full building compliance. So if you imagine like a perfectly square structure, one facade getting resited would trigger full compliance for the building, any building mounted lighting. And then for any residential additions, that would trigger full site-wide compliance. And then for commercial, so it's a similar mechanism, 25% or more of the structure being altered, similar to residential, the same as residential, full building compliance. But then in this case, also 25% or more of square footage being added would trigger site-wide compliance. And that would be footprint expansion or, a second or a third story expansion. I will note also on the commercial side that, and all of this has been a real back and forth and sort of a process, but, we certainly heard the importance of trying to bring some of this lighting that's out there already into compliance at a faster timeline than it would otherwise come in. So that's partly why we're bringing you something at all, right, that this is a concern. But of course, we did work and talk and hear a lot from the business community and trying to be sensitive to the costs. And so parking lot poles are a major cost. They can also be an opportunity for material waste if you're requiring them to move from, say, 24 feet, which is what a lot of them are currently, down to 20. And so we have this exception where if you come in, if you do 25% or more, like you're triggering this overall site-wide compliance, you have to bring the fixtures themselves of the parking lot lights into compliance, but not the height itself. You don't have to completely take out that whole pole. And then I will just note, that this whole mechanism, there's not really something similar in other parts of our building code or other parts of our development review code. So we do, of course, have non-conforming uses and non-conforming sections, but there's nothing that's sort of based on square footage addition. So in this case, it would be unique, again, to respond to the impacts, the sort of general shared impacts of light pollution, to try to find a mechanism that works sort of on both ends. So I've sort of already gone into a little bit of this, but just to sort of to restate a little bit and elaborate. So some of the analysis here, again, we are trying to capture some compliance for existing. And then also, we've tried to create something that can be administered through our current building permit process. So this isn't something that staff would need to create a fully new program in order to do. And it's also something that a lot of people, residents and building and business owners are used to dealing with. They're used to interacting with us at this stage. So we've tried to insert it into that process. We also tried, at least, opinions vary, but on trying to make the commercial addition trigger balance with the overall project scope. So we didn't want to have somebody coming in for a small project, small square footage addition, or a small, one door being changed or what have you, and all of a sudden double the cost in order to comply with this, right? Because that's a cost burden on small businesses. It's also potentially has effects on redevelopment opportunities, et cetera. So we've tried to capture additions where we think, okay, well, this project is already going to be spending thousands of dollars. This ad would be sort of a comparable cost ad. So that was sort of the piece of sensitivity there. And then we also noted that residential costs in general are comparably lower than commercial. So if you're doing an addition, you're already going to be spending very likely much more than the cost to actually redo your lighting site-wide or building-wide. And then finally, I just want to note that, no matter what compliance, if a lighting ordinance is passed, this is going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of new processes for enforcement, simply because of that issue of replacement lighting, right? A lot of people don't know to think, well, the city cares about what bulb I'm going to replace my light with. So we're going to have to build that program regardless of what we adopt. And then finally, I'll just summarize here a little bit of some of the various considerations and input, and you've seen a lot of these through the number of public comments that you all have reviewed. But we certainly as staff find that there's a clear desire for this directed lighting in the city, especially from residents, but really in general. We've even heard from some business owners. But also, a desire to be sensitive to the cost impact, right? So what are we actually asking people to do when they come into compliance if we do have a non-conforming section? Then we've also really tried to make sure that this is something we can implement effectively. Lighting is complex. We do not have a lighting engineer on staff. And so we've tried to really make this something doable, right? And then we've also tried to balance it with the many other city priorities. Do we build and do we suggest to build out a whole program, or do we try to make something that's, pretty ground ready and implementable, so to speak? And I also just want to pull out one more thing here. I won't go into the septet. I'll just end with downtown Louisville because you've gotten a number of public comments about this as well, and it was also an issue at Planning Commission that came up. Downtown is not exempt from the ordinance. It's only exempt from specific commercial regulations. So it actually has a different, it's not subject to the trespass limitation specifically, and it has a lower max lumens cap. The reason for that is the built environment context of downtown. The lots are a lot smaller, the buildings are a lot closer together, and it's a mixed use area. So using trespass as a way to regulate the impact of light on one lot to another, it's effectively impossible. We've even tried to go out with a light meter and measure, could we tell which light it was? And also, it's just a different context, right? It's the downtown of the city. And so we thought, okay, trespass probably isn't really gonna work here, but can we try to bring down some of that max lumens to try to mitigate a little bit of the effect that we do have people who live near and in downtown. And so with that, staff recommends approval of Ordinance 1858, Series 2023, and I'm here for what questions you have.
All right, unless there's any questions on the presentation, I'm going to go to public comment, and then we'll come back for a discussion. All right, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll invite you back. So this will be the first round of public comments. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and if you're a Louisville resident. First up is John Webb.
My name is John Webb. I've lived in Louisville for 31 years. I'm a member of the Parks and Public Landscaping Advisory Board and chair of the Louisville Bee City USA Subcommittee up until about 30 seconds ago, which supports the dark sky ordinance. I'm here tonight to speak in favor of the proposed dark sky lighting ordinance on behalf of our night flying cousins. In August, I visited the small town of West Cliff, Colorado, a dark sky community since 2015. I found the town to be quaint and charming under dark sky conditions and had the pleasure of attending a community star show at the Smoky Jack Observatory and Amphitheater, along with more than 100 townspeople and visitors such as myself. While it's going to be an uphill battle to match the amazing stargazing conditions of the Wet Mountain Valley, I encourage council to approve the dark sky lighting ordinance and encourage the Louisville community to embrace a calmer and gentler nighttime environment. While the human residents of Louisville may enjoy improved views of the nighttime sky, reductions in sleep disturbance, energy savings, and reduction in nighttime glare due to reduced light pollution, I believe that the greatest benefit of reduced wattage and downward directed residential and commercial lighting will be to our night flying insect population. A recent webinar entitled Lights Out for Fireflies, produced by the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, highlighted the disruption and dangers posed by excessive nighttime lighting. I referenced this video in my earlier comments to the Planning Commission, which are in your meeting packet. Insects of all stripes and behaviors have suffered dramatic reductions in abundance and diversity over the past 10 to 15 years. This extraordinary situation has been documented by scientists worldwide and has been dubbed the insect apocalypse. Just like our native and domesticated bees and tens of thousands of other insect species, insects of the night are in trouble. They're under assault from unregulated and ill-advised use of pesticides, loss and fragmentation of habitat, and, oh yes, our most recent existential crisis, climate change. Night-flying insects face an additional hazard. The unshielded and overwattaged outdoor lighting of the urban and suburban environment is extremely disruptive and deadly to the estimated 60% of insects that are out at night. Because artificial lighting obscures the stars and moon, night-flying insects are tricked into navigating by these apparently celestial light sources, which function like the tractor beams on the Death Star. This phenomenon causes the night flyers to circle endlessly around our porch and street lights until they are battered and exhausted, trapped by the ever-present spiders, or fall lifelessly to the ground. It's easy to imagine that thousands of night-flying insects are killed in Louisville every night from mid-May through the first frost in October or November.
Mr. Webb, you're out of time. Could you wrap up?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
This carnage of night-flying insects is not sustainable. In one of the webinars I attended this past summer, a Native American speaker described insects as little souls. These tiny creatures have important work to do every night. Insects don't need us, but we desperately need them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Catherine Smith.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Smith. I'm a Louisville resident, and I'm here tonight to speak in favor of darker residential skies. I think the staff proposal has done a really great job of coming up with a good position with regard to commercial properties. With regard to residential properties, which is our largest kind of landmass area, the rate of change that we would see under this proposal is so incrementally slow that it would be many, many decades before we'd really see a change. So I wanted to say I'm here, I'm aligned with Cindy Bedell, who sent you some very clear pictures of recent construction and the amount of glare and just light that is being emitted from these fixtures in properties. I know from my own home that I have a neighbor, well, two neighbors who like very, very bright, outwardly directed lights. They don't always remember to turn them off. And even, you know, once it's dark, I have to pull my blinds in order just not to be sort of inundated by their light. I have 4 asks tonight. One is that you look at ways to give us the darkest skies possible. The second ask is for you to come up with a phase-in for residential properties. 5 years is what I'm going to throw out there, but whatever you think is feasible and appropriate. I'd like to point out that the costs of these fixtures are, I think, very affordable, and particularly in the context of the wealth of our community in general. And I would like to ask you to use your power as members of our town's council to pressure Excel. And I don't know what that looks like exactly, but we don't have control over our streetlights, and they are a significant source, and they are not dark sky compliant. I don't know whether that's you write to the governor, you write to the PUC, whether you ask the legislature to direct the PUC, to direct Excel to make a change, but I'd like to see Louisville do something to move the ball forward with regard to lighting. And then something I think that it would be nice for us to consider is Toronto has decided to turn off its lights during bird migration, and they're seeing reduced bird mortality as a result of that. And so if we could look at something similar, we know what times of year wildlife is flying overhead. There's actually a lot of great information available on that with all the new tech that we have. And so I would just ask that you consider really kind of broadening the scope of what you're doing, because I think you're in a position to have big impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Joshua Cooperman.
All right, Josh Cooperman. I live in Louisville. I strongly support this dark night sky lighting ordinance. As I've argued on other occasions, I think this dark sky lighting has lots of benefits and no drawbacks. I also think that this is an ideal sort of case for regulation. Because dark sky lighting really has no drawbacks, but a lot of people don't know about it, it's a good case to put a regulation in that says that you should do this. Right. So what else did I want to cover? All right. So I wanted to make, well, I guess I wanted to try to dismiss a few misconceptions, which I think were in a few public comments via letter. First is about security. You know, you can totally accomplish any sort of security lighting you wish with dark sky lighting. Second is about vetting of the ordinance. I think this ordinance has been very well vetted, not only by our own staff and residents and business members, but you know, the ordinance is really based on other ordinances which have been vetted extremely well in the past. There's also a suggestion that the Sustainability Board was not interested in dark sky lighting. In a sense, that is true. You know, this is not a very impactful sustainability measure, and that's why the board didn't want to devote its time to it. And then maybe the last one is, well, the second to last one is about costs. If you have a business in town or a residence in town, you will not incur any costs from this ordinance unless you choose to expand. And then finally, some people have suggested that this ordinance is going to have very little impact on making our skies darker, which is a fair point, but I think that misses the point. I think this is another instance of thinking globally and acting locally, right? If Louisville or somewhere else never bothered to think about a dark sky ordinance, then nowhere else would either, and we just wouldn't make any progress. So we have to start somewhere, and I think Louisville should start. Okay, so I want to make two little recommendations, which I've put in before. One is to lower the maximum color temperature from 3,000 to 2,700 Kelvin. And the other one is to regulate string lights on a per area basis. Finally, I just want to make a few comments about compliance, which is perhaps the main issue tonight or with this ordinance. I would ask that you reconsider an amortization period, which was discussed quite extensively in 2021 when the City Council considered this before. Kind of in relation to that, right? Any new or replacement lighting has to be compliant, and I don't know if we have a way that we're going to enforce that, but that could kind of fit in with an amortization period. And then my last comment is that the 25% expansion or modification rule for commercial, I don't see that as being particularly important. I don't think we're going to capture a whole lot of lighting with that rule, or if it were increased to 50% or something like that. So
Thank
not
you
critical.
for your comments.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Sherry Summer.
Sherry Summer, Louisville. First, I'd like to address the commercial side of this regulation. So at one point, I was under the impression that if 25% or more of a facade was altered, that would trigger an upgrade in lighting. I wasn't sure, I didn't quite get that from tonight's presentation, but if that is the case, I was wondering how this would interact with the facade improvement program that the LRC is working on, and their desire to upgrade the facades. So I think that's important to think about. When I was at the Planning Commission review of this, I'm forgetting the name of the commissioner, but she had proposed 25% threshold, and later was kind of regretting that. And I kind of wonder, is 25% the correct threshold for commercial lighting regulations relative to residential? Like, how much impact would that have in relation to the impact of all the residential regulations? I differ from some of the other speakers. While there's a place for codes and regulations, I think education is such a powerful tool, and it is the one thing that really leads to true change. And so I love that this was mentioned tonight. And I also, I wanted to point out a couple things I've heard on the campaign trail. I hear a lot of people saying how much they love the activities in Louisville. They just love them and appreciate them so much. So how could we weave in an educational component into some of our activities, like such as Children's Story Hour, or maybe some displays at the library, or a mural? I think that would be important, because the other thing I've been hearing is sometimes I'll ask people what their concerns are, and they'll say, why does the city want us to change out our light bulbs? And so I feel like this is not like an obvious topic for most people or many people. It's a small sample, but I do think we need to rely on the power of education. And thanks so much for all your work, Director Zuccaro, on this over many years, and to everyone who's worked on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Rick Crone.
Mayor, Council, sorry I'm late. I'm Rick Crone. I'm the president of the Downtown Business Association and have been for the last glorious 5 years. I'm opposed to it. I don't think you ought to pass it. Or you ought to fix it and then pass it. But I don't think it's in a position to be adopted tonight. First, I think it's going to be ineffective, which you've heard before. Boulder's only 10 miles away, Denver 20, Longmont practically next door, Lafayette, Erie, and Superior, all of which have got something other than dark sky lighting. Number two, I think it's one more impediment to people wanting to improve their buildings. It's not a major cost, but it's another impediment. It's one more thing. Third, I think it's an impediment to filling our vacant buildings up. Again, one more thing. The 25% on the exterior and 25% trigger on the square footage discriminates against small business. Why? Because small businesses are small. 25% of a small number is an extremely small number. Larger buildings are going to be able to build much bigger than those smaller buildings, so it inadvertently discriminates against your smaller businesses, which are probably the most interesting and important businesses you have in town. Let's see. I think it discriminates against the elderly and the sight impaired, since being darker makes it much more difficult to read a menu at a restaurant outdoor. For that matter, being able to just walk down the street. I think it affects the perception of safety. Now, actual statistical safety, I'm willing to believe the police department, which said it's going to be okay. The problem is the perception of safety, what people feel like as they're walking down the street. If it's dark, they're going to think there's a problem, whether there is or not, statistically. Let's see. In previous discussions, there's been a considerable amount of discussion of possible incentive programs to help pay for this. Now, in downtown, we're probably going to be in pretty good shape, I suspect, but the rest of the city is out there without an incentive program that could have been put in place along with this and with either a companion bill or as part of this bill. And that just simply didn't happen. It got completely ignored as far as I can tell. It's not in there at all. Let's see, and with that, I will stop and recommend that it not pass, or if you're going to pass it, continue it, fix it, and pass it later. Leave it to the next council, for example. Thank you very much, Mayor, Council.
Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers wish to speak?
My name is Andy Johnson. I'm a Louisville resident and business owner. I thought this would be a little easier, but pass this because it's a great ordinance. It's important. It also promotes a few things architecturally that I think are important for our city. First of all, it creates order. It has a higher level of aesthetic value, and overall, I think it creates a generally better environment. Here's what I didn't expect to have to say, but I think that dark sky is probably improperly named. It does not mean less light. It means better lighting. It means designed lighting. It doesn't mean you throw a wall pack on the wall and that's how you get to your back door or the front door. It just means that we're going to put more thought into how we light our buildings, including our homes. All of this has been happening for a very long time. We're just kind of getting caught up. The one thing I did want to say that was really important is that having attended the public meetings, it is so impressive how staff not only presented the material, but became experts on the topic to the point where some of us professionals were openly schooled in those public meetings, and very appropriately so. So we all learned something, and really it's more kudos to staff than anything, but pass this ordinance. It's important, and it's a really good one. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to go to Zoom. Looks like first up is Rick and Ruta.
Okay, my name's Richard Rutajczyk. I'm a fire survivor. Our home is right along the Castle Avenue. I'm for the dark skies. I kind of want to address it from the perspective of a residential. I hope that everyone can hear me okay on there.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention is ever since Louisville changed the lights along McCaslin to the from the mercury vapor to the LED lighting, it created a lot of problems for the people along there as far as light coming into the homes because these lights were so bright. I hear a lot of talk. I think it's a great idea to have somehow these lights addressed to somehow direct them so they actually direct the light down. when the lights were initially installed, I was able to contact the one of the engineers at GE, and they did inform me about the home side shield, which is something that actually I had put on the light right behind our home, which actually helped considerably with lighting being directed into our windows. Unfortunately, at the time, they did not have a shield or a complete surround shield for the light. The engineer at GE, when I spoke with him, he said there was no call for that, so they had no design. As far as those lights, I've seen in other areas, especially in San Diego and San Francisco area, they were able to put in shields around those lights so the light actually just would be directed downward and you would not see any of the light coming from lights across the street or down the street in your windows. And I'm kind of hoping that that's something that is taken into consideration with the dark skies, because these LED lights along McCaslin, and considering McCaslin has a downhill slope or uphill slope, depending on which direction you're looking at it, really impacts lights going into people's homes. So either if they're going to replace the lights or speak with, try to get a hold of GE, find out if there's some kind of development where they can actually put a shield around those lights where they would actually help direct the light downward and not have any light be directed into people's windows. I think that would be a great idea. Either that or see if there is the availability of some kind of dimmer to be put in line with the lights to maybe reduce the intensity. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It looks like that wraps up public comment, so we will go to council questions and discussion.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Councilor Hefner has a question.
I have two questions, actually, and I hope they'll both be brief. One is as far as a residential addition, I don't see a definition for that. Can you just give us a sense of what, maybe that's a dumb question, but what constitutes an addition? Is there a certain type of project? I mean, I assume repainting your house doesn't count.
Right. Yep. So it's based on our building permit additions. And so, yeah, painting your house wouldn't count. And the obvious things would, right? Any addition of square footage beyond what you have existing. I would also say the other part that would potentially trigger it is we do code, like if you were to take down half your house and rebuild half that house, even in the exact same footprint, that would also count as an addition, and we would count that as an addition for this ordinance as well.
What about like replacing a fence?
That's not an addition.
That's helpful. And then my other question is, there's reference in here to flame source, but excluding gas flame sources. What does that leave?
Like fires, like in your
like
right?
an outdoor fire.
Like an
Wouldn't it be subject to the ordinance or like
yes. Right. So I think the intent there is right, exactly, not to regulate people's outdoor fires or their grills of any kind or anything like that. Right. So that's the other type of fire, wood or charcoal.
And so that means like a gas fire just isn't under this at all.
Right. I mean, yes. So flame sources shouldn't be a part of this ordinance, or like a tiki torch, anything like that.
Okay.
I can pull it up and see maybe if I can look at what you're looking at as well to.
So it says so the following outdoor lighting applications are exempt from all requirements of this chapter. Decorative lighting provided by a flame source, except that gas-fired lighting appliances are prohibited.
So the intent is like a tiki torch type light would be allowed as a decorative light, but sometimes people have a natural gas lantern light attached to their house, and those would not be allowed because they're not shielded, is what that is supposed to be.
Okay, I think that's it for me.
I'm going to take the opportunity to follow up with your question. So I also had a question about the 25%, and I think probably all of us on council here have replaced at least one roof. Does a roof count? Or let me continue with that. I mean, in my case, My house was exposed to 2018, so I had to do a lot of siding, windows, and everything else. So, and to add on to that, what about just normal maintenance?
Right, exactly. Okay, so roof wouldn't count as an addition, so you would come in for a re-roof permit that wouldn't trigger compliance for your lighting. Swapping out windows wouldn't trigger compliance for your lighting. Re-siding, that's where you would get into potentially changing, having to comply. So if you had, and when you submit a permit, like in general terms, we have access to the square footage, we have access to what exactly it is, what side of the building, what you're doing. So I think it would be pretty straightforward to try to figure out the percentage. And that's where if you are above 20% or 25%, then that would trigger the building wide. So any lighting on the building itself would need to come into compliance.
I just wanted to add that if, let's say your siding was damaged by hail, which I think is maybe something you're talking about, if the city were to adopt this ordinance, now everybody's insurance is different, but often insurance has law and ordinances coverage, so so that there could potentially be insurance coverage for the lights, even though you're just upgrading the siding.
Good point, thank you. Others? Councilor Hamilton.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate that you consulted with so many different community members throughout this process, and our police force as well. I have two questions. The first one is bouncing off of the previous question. So ADUs down the road, if those were something to be passed, how would that be handled? And solar panels as well. As I was thinking through this ordinance, I was thinking about our sustainability goals and how we want to encourage residents to make changes to support those goals. And so solar panels popped in my head. So I'll let you answer that first before I ask my other question.
Okay, so for ADUs would fall under new construction, and if you were to have an ADU or a garage or any other structure, you would be looking at needing to have that be in compliance. If you had an attached ADU, like you built an addition off your house, if that comprised 25% or more of your existing square footage for that structure, that whole building would need to come into compliance. But adding an ADU separate from that, that wouldn't trigger site-wide or building compliance on the actual primary house.
Okay, so it would trigger the site-wide compliance, theoretically.
I don't think the intent, so I don't think it would, but I can revisit the definition to check, but I think the intent was that it would be only on the building itself that was affected in that case.
Okay.
Right, it's a little, yeah.
Okay, and then solar panels, does that fall under the roofing?
I'm not sure, so are you asking if, would a permit for solar panels trigger lighting compliance?
Yeah, like if you're covering your roof more than 25% of your building with solar panels, is that considered a change?
Right, exactly. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't think that would trigger.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we treat those as a completely separate type of permit, and I don't think that would trigger, even under the language of the ordinance, that this would trigger lighting compliance.
Okay, and then, thank you. My second question is, help me understand why there's not residential light trespassing included in this code.
Yeah, that's a great question, something we've talked about extensively. Certainly, I will say that we have heard from a number of residents interest in trying to regulate the lighting that they experience on neighboring properties, of course, right? That goes to the sleep and just general enjoyment of your property. So certainly an important issue. And I think there are a number of reasons why we've kind of landed where we've landed in terms of our recommendation. I think the main one is, or sort of the main one and two are, first of all, enforcing that would be largely compliance, complaint-based. And so we'd sort of be fostering a situation in which we'd have neighbors complaining on neighbors at potentially a rather high level, and certainly that's something we deal with, right? I mean, neighbor complaints are how we learn about a lot of different things, certainly. But sort of trying to avoid writing that into the code, but instead taking sort of a more education-forward approach on the trespass piece in particular, just again from that sort of limiting the instances of like complaints-based trespass issues only. Then the second thing that's sort of related to that is, again, just from an enforcement perspective, some of the residences, it's very difficult to tell whose lighting is impacting whom. And of course, in some cases, it really is very straightforward. You've got somebody with a spotlight, that's a little easier. But in some cases, it's sort of difficult when the houses are closer together. And so I think just from a practicality standpoint, it's not something that we thought trespass would really be the the route that we'd want to take. I think also we tried to capture residents' impact on other residents in other ways. So part of that was, for instance, we have the height limitation of 20 feet, no higher than 20 feet. And that limitation is so that, you have like a entryway or you have, a deck lighting, but you're not having ornamental lighting that's up on your second story or even above your garage that has a higher likelihood of shining onto your neighbor's property. So we thought that was something that was a little easier to enforce, that would, not going to achieve the extent of the trespass regulations, but would be, effective in sort of helping that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey and then Councilor Dickinson.
Thank you. Yes. First, I want to say this was an amazing presentation, very complete. I have a couple of questions that, well, first one is on the parking lot poles. Is there any way that we could add something to this at a later date that would regulate how high the parking lot poles could be, especially if they're replacing them? And is this already a consideration for new construction? So new construction, the poles have to be under 20 feet. Right, okay.
Exactly, yep.
Okay, that's my first one. Second one is the street lights are owned and operated by Excel, are they not?
Correct.
And do we have any authority to tell them that they have to be under 20 feet and shielded?
So I will turn this to Director Zucchero, who's worked a lot on the street light issue.
So I think that certainly the city can work with Excel. They have limited options, but they have some options. And we recently changed out the majority of our decorative street lights in the entire city to go to LED lights. They are dark sky compliant. We worked with them to put on back shields. There's still a lot of line of sight glare. So your question about could we have them do lower poles? I think if we would have to pay them to do it, and then I think we have to have some consideration about light spread. So lights in the neighborhoods aren't intended to light the entire street, but when they're taller, they light a bigger area. So, if you're trying to light an intersection or an area for safety, if you lower it too much, you have less light spread. So yes, we could, I think is the direct answer to your question. If we wanted to pay for it, they probably have options that are smaller.
Okay. I'm just saying that in our two-story house that we lost in the fire, there was a street light right at the bottom of our driveway that shined right into the bedrooms. So, then the last question I have is on the timing of the lights. You said something about requiring that lights be turned off, like from, I don't know, midnight to 6 a.m. or something. Is that something that we can add into the ordinance now, or would that be an amendment or something later down the road?
So the only curfew is for unshielded, like patio string lighting, or not literally patio, but string lighting. So it's 11 p.m. for residents as drafted, and then it's closing or 30 minutes after the conclusion of activities, which would cover like somebody closing up shop, right? I think the reason it's not anywhere else, and so to answer your direct question, if you wanted to put on midnight to 6 p.m. all lights off, that would need to be an addition to the ordinance as drafted. And I would just say, because again, this is another thing we've talked a lot about, the reason that's not in the ordinance goes to the security piece, that people are, again, it's not to necessarily reduce and turn off all lighting, but it's to make it more directed and more effective. And there are properties in the area that, do operate 24 hours a day, or they have people visiting 24 hours a day, or the police department has explicitly suggested to them that they should have some lighting on for 24 hours a day. And so with those considerations, we don't have anything that would say like security lighting, parking lot lighting, anything like that has any type of curfew for residents or commercial.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Dickinson?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a long road with a lot of things, and which also means this started a long time ago as well, right? With even a different councils when we started this whole process. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into getting us to this point. A few questions. One, is there really any opposition to directed lighting? Like, is there anyone who's like, no, we really need the light to go up, that's a positive thing. Like, is there even any other side to the argument from a sort of experience or visual?
And you're asking specifically about shielded lighting?
Yeah, most, I mean, the
Shielding?
idea of directing the light down and not up, like, you know, you're replacing the lights on Front Street, and they're this globe that the light went everywhere, and now there's a little lid on them, and so that it's better. But like, is there anyone who's like, that annoys us? Is there even any opposition to this directed lighting or shielded lighting concept?
I think it is very small, certainly because we have talked to so many people. We have heard, I would say, like 2 people who want, you know, full blast lighting out this way.
Right.
But that was a vanishingly small number.
And so, I mean, what I do here is like concern about cost. So if I'm building a new house, of course, resident, as you pointed out, different than commercial, is the kind of lighting I'm gonna have at my house than a business. But I think of it as being neutral. Like on a new project, it's a choice more than it is a cost. Am I wrong there? Or is this actually more expensive in a new construction?
No, so yeah, I mean, I think it, of course, costs vary widely. It's very difficult to give you an actual estimate of what these costs would be. But in general, yes, it's not more expensive to have dark sky compliant lighting. It's just, in some limited cases, depending on what kind of lighting you want, it can be more limited. Your options can be more limited. But in general, it's not a price add when you're starting from no construction and you're building something new.
And then I'll imagine again, oh yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing to that on a commercial project. Just as an example, on a parking lot, so we used to allow 24. If this is adopted, we'd allow 20-foot lights. Sometimes when you're having shorter lights, in order to get good light spread, you do have to add some additional lights. So
Yep.
just to be clear, sometimes you would have to add some additional. Each light isn't more expensive necessarily,
Got it.
but you might need to add some more.
Yeah, so I was thinking on the commercial side, it's probably a bigger ask even at a brand new construction. On the 25%, I guess I was a little like, so if I don't even touch the exterior, but I do some sort of like major interior project, is that going to trigger exterior lighting compliance? Or is we only talking about like if there's an exterior project?
As drafted, it's exterior only.
Okay, which then that makes me more comfortable around like the measurement, and we're not including roofs when we talk about percentage, like the roof doesn't count, it's the facade, the 4 facades or 2 facades, depending on, I mean, it could be almost like a 1 facade building if it's, like a Main Street building.
Yes, exactly, right. So I mean, and the logic there is that the lights are on the walls, the lights are on the building, you know, and so the roof would not be part of that. And certainly I think, I don't know how the mechanism for this, but if there needs to be a clarifying language in that specific issue for that definition, I think that would certainly be very easily doable, and that's certainly the intent.
Okay. A bigger issue I have is sort of the goal, and I think we kind of spoke to this a little bit, like, if the goal is to be able to go out into the street and look up and see the stars, right? If that's kind of the goal of this project, you know, somebody brought up, I think it was Rick, you know, like Boulder and Denver and Broomfield and Westminster are having a major impact on my ability to look up and see the stars, right? And so I'm a little concerned that we're doing something with good intention and zero ability to have a actual result, right? That like, we're not gonna be able to go out in our street and look up and see the stars if we're gonna stay neighbors with Boulder and Denver, which I think that's our plan currently. And so I'm a little concerned about that. I don't think I'm not against it. I'm just concerned that that's one issue that we might be facing, is like a lot of to do without really much of a result in the end. So I'm a little concerned there. And so then where I want to focus on, or where is the major light pollution that we really could see a difference in our town? And I think streetlights and parking lots, right? Those parking lots that have to stay open. We don't really have in Louisville, I mean, right next to Louisville, but like car dealerships, right? Those are, in my brain, are some of the biggest. I mean, they leave those lights on tons. So it feels like focusing on those, and then I'm just curious if we feel like this, as drafted, if we're going to be capable of making an impact on some of our largest light polluters. Again, I'm thinking large parking lots, big commercial areas, street lights. If we're not going to make really much impact on any of those, they're going to stay at 24 feet. But like, again, I'm concerned that we're doing a lot for a little. Let's see if there's another question. Again, I'm excited about what incentives we can bring to this as we roll it out, and as Council Member Mayor Pro Tem Fahey was saying, the education piece around, getting people to comply, because a lot of this, again, as written, we can talk about if we want to change things. If my lights at my house are a problem for my neighbor, this won't do anything unless I make some major change in my house. I'm not going to be asked by the city to do anything until I change my lighting or do an addition. And so I think there's going to be some confusion with some of our residents, like, hey, we just passed a dark sky rule and my neighbor has this light that I want to see dimmed. It's like, well, no, we're not going around and changing lights that are already in existence. Like, okay, what did we just do? Then like, what was the point of it? Like, well, if your neighbor rebuilds their house, like, okay, cool. So I just, I'm concerned that I want this to have an impact, and I'm thinking that we might have I don't actually have a problem doing this, and I don't know if I'm too early on this section of the conversation, but I don't have a problem doing this. I just don't think it's enough, or I don't think it's going to have the impact that we actually want to have. So like an incentive program to get people to change their lights out, an incentive program to get people to comply with these concepts, like an education program, a dark night event where everyone turns the lights off, or, projects where we display the difference, right? Like trying to figure out ways to actually make a big difference. I think this is going to help it kind of feels like a no-brainer. When a new house is built, like, well, this is the lighting code. This is how you do it. This is the better way to do it. That's easy. It doesn't even cost you more. Just do it. But how do we actually get a result from this where the work, all this effort, all this work, all this community engagement ends up having an impact?
Councilor Lay?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation, because this is, clearly a lot of work has gone into this and a lot of public process, and I appreciate that. And it is kind of nice to hear Andy Johnson say he's getting educated by our staff on that, because that's not a bad thing at all. So thank you for that. I guess I have a couple of questions relating, a number of questions. One is, I'm looking at section 1726.030, which is applicability and scope, and I'm looking at the non-conforming status, that all existing outdoor lighting that was legally installed before the effective date of the chapter that doesn't conform shall be considered non-conforming, and it's allowed to remain. So if it is purchased but not yet installed, for example, in the instance where somebody, and I'm thinking fire survivors, if they've purchased some of this, but they haven't installed it because they're not finished with their house or something like that, how is that going to be treated? It sounds like they are going to have to purchase something different. Is that right?
So I think in general for any permits, and those permits included, any permits that we have in process currently, I think the way we've been thinking about them is those would not be subject to this ordinance. But I think if your question is somebody who hasn't yet submitted a permit but who's already gone ahead and purchased their lighting, I think by as drafted, they would be subject. They would be required to comply. So I'm really not sure how many instances, but that certainly could have occurred.
Yeah, and that may be a sort of counting angels on the head of a pin. It may not be something that even occurs. I just don't know. Is that something that in building people have done? Because, you know, I know that some folks have purchased a whole bunch of stuff, or they did early on because there were supply chain problems and things. And I guess I would hate for people to have to go back and redo that if they had done that. And I don't know whether, you know, that could be a small drafting change if that happened, but I just don't know how widely. I have absolutely no data to suggest that that's going to be a big impact. I just wondered about it.
The only thing I can add is that, you know, we certainly have heard from Marshall Fire families talking about this ordinance. You know, we've gotten feedback, and I think they've definitely been concerned about where they are in the permit process and would this affect them. That's not the question that you're asking, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that is what we've heard about, and that's what we do have a clear answer to. However, I think, again, I am not personally sure of the mechanisms of how we do this, but if there was some type of carve out to say, you know, Marshall Fire, I don't know how we would implement that, to be honest, but or how to make it fair, but it's certainly something we could try to look into.
It strikes me it might be a pretty simple sort of thing. I don't want to put anybody to a fool's errand, but if that's something that's potentially a thing, it's easy enough to fix, I would suppose. One of the things that I guess I'm concerned about in the presentation so far is just cost issues. I think Councilmember Dickinson mentioned that a bit, and there's I don't see an awful lot of discussion of how much this is going to cost the new business. It's new businesses, for example, that are definitely going to be subject to it. It sounded from the earlier presentation like it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, and that's why it wasn't really covered so much. Is that correct?
So if you're asking why we haven't talked as much about cost estimates and what the actual costs would look like, those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the answer to that, and I actually do have a slide that I can share that gives our best estimate that we shared with Planning Commission when they asked us this question. I'm happy to take a moment to pull that up. But in general, the reason we haven't foregrounded the cost piece is in terms of information for you all is because it's just very tentative numbers.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to assess. And in some cases, I think there's like one other jurisdiction that actually did have a full assessment, and they hired consultants to do specifically 3 sites that they mapped out, like how much do we think it would cost to retrofit those 3 sites. That was a whole consulting contract. Mm-hmm. So it's just tough to do. That being said, I'm happy to actually pull that up if you'd like to look at some more
estimates. If
estimates.
you would, I'd sure appreciate it. I mean,
yep, absolutely.
part of the difficulty of imposing regulations is trying to figure out what the cost is going to be. And I noticed somewhere in the presentation that it's going to require the city, in order to be compliant, to get a consultant to figure out what the cost is going to be for us. Is that right?
Maybe you're talking about Planning Commission? I remember that discussion.
Yeah,
yes.
It may have been in the Planning Commission part. That's actually, no, it is. It was in one of the Planning Commission minutes that was the way the city would have to do it. I'm presuming that might be something that somebody else is going to have to do if they're going to be subjected to this too.
Yeah, right. So if any lighting for the city were to have to be updated and wasn't in compliance with this ordinance, then we'd have to go through a whole process of budgeting that, figuring out the cost and everything. I will say, I mean, in talking to facilities, I'd say a number of the existing facilities are already dark sky compliant in some way or another. And so, again, we haven't done a full scope of all the city facilities, but in those conversations that we had early on in the process, like they're already doing cutoff, they're already doing a number of other things, lowering the brightness, all those pieces. And they also have dimming functionality and a lot more flexibility as well. So.
I didn't mean to interrupt you on your
No, that's absolutely fine. Yep, so here is the heavily caveated numbers, but these are, so just know that up and down here, but I'm just gonna go ahead and give you a sense. So from residential, we could estimate, a site-wide cost, let's say somewhere in the neighborhood of $750 to $1,000 total. That's if you are going out and you're having somebody install them, somebody pick them, you're doing really nice lighting. This is not, you're gonna try to become an electrician and figure out how to put it on your, that's like maybe 50 or $100, right? But we tried to give you the higher end sense of what like a full new build, right, would look like. And that's assuming 3 to 4 lights in the house. And we came to that because staff did a neighborhood survey in 2021, back in the old days, and we walked around some neighborhoods and we, did basically a lighting audit and a survey to try to figure out about how many lights per average. And so we estimated 3 to 4. We also estimated that about a quarter of residences already complied with downlighting specifically, again, using that survey, so just to give you that sense. And then in terms of commercial, and here's where it gets even a whole lot hairier, but I've sort of tried to break out cost estimates by project and then by lighting type. Before I get into those numbers, I also just want to note that in talking to a number of business owners and trying to talk to other jurisdictions, we heard a lot about different costs. And one of the things we heard was that the rate of replacement is faster than you might imagine it would be, even for, and maybe in particular for some of these higher, like new LED lights. That's good news if you are somebody who wants the replacement lighting and the dark sky lighting to come in sooner. Of course, though, it is a cost that's not acknowledged in these numbers. So these numbers assume that you're popping in the lights and then you're good for 10 or 15 years. But what we're seeing is that, you should expect to replace your bulbs and maybe even, not really your fixtures, but especially the wall packs and the bulbs and the lighting, within 5 years in some cases. So just to note that this might even go higher depending on what kind of lighting you get and kind of what your rate of replacement is. So with all that said, an estimate of a 3-story apartment with about 100 parking lots, $76,000 for a full retrofit. So retrofitting all the lighting to be dark sky compliant, again, not with this code, but with a comparable code. And that is also all inclusive. So, soup to nuts, labor, materials, everything. And for a 28,000 square foot office space, also including parking, but just not really sure how many spots that was, $119,000 retrofit. What accounts for the difference between those two numbers, I do not know. I wish I did. But that is also a full retrofit fit and all-inclusive. And those two numbers are from Fort Collins. That's the jurisdiction that did the estimates. And then also, we got some estimates from folks here in town about work that they had done recently. We had an example of a 2-tenant strip mall area, a partial retrofit that cost $8,000, and that was materials only. So let's say about half of the building cost, and again, not labor, that's just the materials themselves. So, you can see this is a cost, right? This is definitely a cost. And then also just to give you a different way of looking at it, if you're looking at materials only, so soffit lighting, you can imagine $50 for soffit lighting, $300 for a wall pack, sorry, I'm close. And then $770 for a parking lot light, and that is the fixture only. So it doesn't include redoing any of the poles or anything. So those are some numbers to think through.
No, that's helpful. And right now, are there any incentive programs in place? I may just have missed this in the previous.
No, and I'll say again, the incentive part, it's the reason that we don't, it doesn't go in an ordinance, right? We wouldn't put the incentive program in the ordinance, so that's why it's not in the ordinance. But also, and we have talked a lot about this, we've talked to PACE, we've talked to Excel, we've talked to other jurisdictions, and so certainly we've done a lot of legwork. We haven't shown it to you now because we don't know what's going to be adopted, right? We don't know what the incentive program is that we'd want to approach. But I will show you, this is some more information that I prepared for Planning Commission. There are rebate programs that other jurisdictions have adopted. In general, I'd say they tend to be the communities that are actually achieving that light pollution, dark sky level, right? It's a little bit different than what we'd be aiming for here. But that dark sky is important to their tourism and their sense, their identity, so to speak. Moab is a great example of this. They actually, however, have a private community group that funds their rebate program. So they don't have another jurisdiction or government or anything program that they're pulling from. It's community organization that gets them those dollars. And they have $100 for everybody and $200 for income qualifying group. But again, that's not something that we or you all would necessarily have control over to follow that model. And then I would also say, we talked to PACE and Excel, as I mentioned, and these are some rough estimates, but, I'd say a combination of PACE and Excel covered about half of a recent $16,000 update project that included lighting, but was not limited to lighting. And PACE rebates are capped at about $20,000, and in general, Excel for the total project, and then general Excel's rebates come in a little lower than that. So certainly there are options. The other thing to note too about I'm pretty sure it was PACE, they are like kind of first come, first serve throughout the year. So once they run out of that money, they run out of that money. So not really something super strong to hang our hat on. And doing this research, this is also part of the reason why we are not bringing something that's more aggressive or that is amortization or something like that. It's because the numbers are sort of difficult to put in place.
One last question, which is a different kind of cost entirely. It's the cost of enforcement. How many people, how many FTEs would we have to add to do the kind of enforcement that is contemplated?
Yep, so when we were drafting out, several different options for Planning Commission and for community engagement, we talked about having $100,000 for an FTE, for one FTE to run this program. Honestly, that would be a busy job, but it would be a job, and that could run from an enforcement program, but would mostly be something that we'd have with our existing code enforcement actually doing the work, but having somebody to implement an amortization program or a more aggressive type of enforcement program. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking, but going sort of to that higher level, that's what we estimated to have one person implement, education and get people in on a 3 to 5 to 10 year amortization timeline and all that. So in terms of what it would cost for enforcement for this, we've tried to slot it into what we have currently. So our idea, right, is to, and again, if this gets passed tonight, if this gets passed ever, the next day, we're talking about what the program looks like. It includes education first and foremost, because getting out in front of people, replacing their lighting and updating their lighting, that's the most cost-effective way to do it. We do already have a really nice, robust dark sky program that the Open Space currently runs that we've started to partner with, and we'd like to expand from there. So we've got materials, we've got a lot of stuff ready to go. That's the most cost-effective way to do it. But certainly, we have a new code enforcement officer in planning, and we try to slot that into what her work already is. Although, of course, she is very busy. So, just realistically, yeah, it's tight.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we're going to go to a second round of public comments. Thank you very much for all those answers. Anybody in the chambers? Second round of comments? Seeing no hands. Anybody on Zoom? Oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. Seeing no one on Zoom. So first up for going back to council will be Councilor Most.
Feelings about this ordinance, and I talked to fellow council members, I talked to people in the community. I think now I may be more confused on where I stand. It sounds like there are some good things in here, and then it sounds like it's not really enough to be truly effective. And so that kind of gives me some pause, because
We will take a minute to have Councilor Most.
Did I lose you?
Yes, we did, but I think it's probably okay if you want to just use audio.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn the video off. Okay, so bad hotel. Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that's interesting to me is I hear a lot of different opinions, pro and con, from both sides of what you would consider normally like both sides of this issue. So, my first explanation was, well, it's not really strong enough to be meaningful. I think we have to be mindful of the obviously impacts of an ordinance like this. I guess initially I was disappointed that we weren't doing anything about light intrusion on the residential side. As someone who had a really unfortunate situation with this in Boulder, where when I asked someone to not to move their light so it wasn't shining in my bedroom. They intentionally did it to make worse. I guess, but that's a whole nother level of issue. So I guess I'm just really interested to hear what everyone else thinks. I'm listening to the questions, and I'm just wondering what everybody on the council has, what their sense is, because I just have a strong inclination at this point either way.
Thank you. Others on council? Councilor Hefner?
So I'll tell you, I've been listening carefully as well, and especially having just seen some of the costs, which I think were higher than maybe I had in my mind, and also hearing what I thought were pretty thoughtful comments on the importance of the education piece. I wonder if we shouldn't all consider some sort of phase-in period where these start as design guidelines. They're not mandatory, they're guidance. Test it out, see what kind of results we get. We don't hire a 6-figure FTE to implement the program, which we shouldn't really do given our recent budget discussions, and try and get some experience with this before we impose a standard citywide. I know there's a lot of feeling of urgency behind this, and I want to be sensitive to that. But at the same time, I don't want to jump into something that maybe has some kinks that need to be worked out or some learning that we all need to do, and certainly give the community time to understand what the idea is here. So I'd certainly be interested in reactions to that.
Others? Councilor Hamilton?
So I just want to reground us in that at the beginning of her presentation, Amelia mentioned that there are benefits even if we do not achieve 100% dark sky lighting goals. So, and she listed off a few examples. So I want to make sure that we keep that in mind. To me, progress is something. There's a lot of things we do as a city, a community, as individuals that will not immediately hit the target out of the gate, but you're making progress in the right direction. And I do appreciate how it's currently written, I think does try to address some of the cost in a cost-conscious way. What was not, I don't think, included in those slides was the delta between what it would have cost without the ordinance and then what it would cost with the ordinance. So yes, those numbers looked high, but what was the delta based on not having to do dark sky lighting? Was it $100,000? Was it $5,000? Like for me, yeah, the numbers were high. I will acknowledge that. But what was it compared to otherwise? So I like this ordinance. I think it's good progress. It also gives some teeth for those residents who live near commercial areas and have light trespassing. And then as far as the FTE goes, so as it's written right now, it is not proposing hiring a 6-figure FTE, right?
Correct, yes, I'm sorry that I was confusing. That is only for we tested out more aggressive amortization, right. But as written, there's no FTE request associated.
Okay, because I hear you, Councilmember Hefner, on the cost as far as the FTE goes, but that's not an issue with this particular draft.
But maybe I misunderstood that. I was hearing that was to enforce what this ordinance is.
Totally my mistake in saying it in a confusing manner. It is not related, it is not part of this ordinance as drafted.
Okay, just wanted to clear that up. So yeah, I just wanted to bring us back to what's the goal. I liked Andy's comment about maybe we're mistaken on calling this dark sky lighting. It's really targeted lighting, better designed lighting. So yeah, I hear everyone on these thoughts, but I think progress is better than nothing at this point. And I like the way the progress is planned out here from a cost perspective, honestly.
I'm going to jump in take an opportunity to be in the middle of the conversation. So the 1/4 of the homes, I think it was related to a program, I believe it was like 2016 or something along those lines. I know I was on council when it actually happened. It was a staff initiative to do some education. And they also worked with Lowe's. Lowe's would mark, lights that were dark sky, and they were giving 10% off. So I was one of those people that went over to Lowe's, did it myself for probably $120. And, so my 3 lights on the outside of my house are compliant. So I'm probably one of those 1/4 that got counted. So that was a good program. And, my feeling on this is I think targeted lighting, thank you for the new wording. Everybody calls it dark sky though. So my concern is much less with residential. My concern is about what is the cost impact of businesses. And so, one of my questions is, if we were looking at a commercial business expanding their footprint is what we're talking about, or redoing something in the exterior of 25%, how many of those do we see a year of the commercial properties?
Yep, so I do have those numbers. I'll have to log in to get them exact, but it's not that many, actually. So in terms of the comments about the rate of compliance, I think we did the last 5 years, and I'll just pull up the actual numbers for you, and I have both residential and commercial.
Yeah, because in your slides, you were saying there was 1,260 commercial industrial properties. I'm guessing it's probably less than 1% a year. Because we're not really, we're not concerned about the new construction because they will put in the right kind of fixtures.
Right, exactly. Okay. If you can keep going, it's going to take me 1 more minute. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So, my feeling is this is a relatively low number. Going to, the comment about, do we make an impact? I think that, in the 8 years I've been on council, we've done things where we've made a statement and it's a bigger world in Louisville. I would say what we did around the gun ordinances, we prohibited guns being sold in Louisville, and we have no gun shops in Louisville. So why did we pass that? I think we were making an important statement, and so for me, that's a principle that's important. Did you have an answer?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Okay, so for residential additions, so we took 2018 to now just to try to get before and after the COVID impact. So residential additions from 2018 to current, 155 coded as additions, and then commercial additions 2018 to now, just around 20. And I will say that doesn't include additions that were coded as parts of larger projects. The coding isn't exact because I was using the building permit data, but I think that does give you actually a sense of the rate.
Okay, so that's 5 years, 2018 to today.
Right.
Right, so 155, so that's basically 30 a year out of 6,550 residences. And on the commercial side, that would be 4 out of the 1,260. So we're talking about a relatively low number.
Right.
Now,
yes.
It has an impact on the owner of that building, but I think those numbers are relatively low. So, whatever that means to us, I think that's important context. I can support this the way it's written. I wouldn't, I appreciate the comments about the Marshall Fire people. I'm not sure how many of them bought exterior lights, but compared to the cost of rebuilding the home, and I think that's a relatively minor thing. The people that I talked to who were doing rebuilding, I was like, well, why wouldn't you do dark sky lighting for your home anyhow? But I'm prepared to support this. So, other thoughts?
I would just, sorry.
I'm sorry. I forgot to call on Mayor Pro Tem Fahey.
By all means.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would also like to support this. I agree with what Counselor Hamilton said, that there are so many things that this will help with the lighting. And it's kind of a first step. So we can get this in, and then we can go around and get those incentives for the businesses or for residential. But just take the first step and maybe motivate our surrounding communities to do the same. That's what I would prefer.
Counselor Hefner?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, you reminded me of Council Member Lay's concern about maybe projects that are sort of partway in process. And again, I move to consider some sort of period of time where this doesn't go into effect, to let those people finish what they're doing. Maybe there are other folks out there, right? It's probably a small number every year, but who are in process on a project, they have design documents, whatever the case may be. Give them some time to finish what they're doing before this kicks in and they have to start again midstream. I feel like at a minimum we should have some period of time after we announce this is the new rule to let people come into compliance and adjust their plans accordingly.
Do you mind if I ask staff to comment on that?
By all means.
Yes, so the comment that comes to mind is just that obviously not everybody knows about this, right? I mean, that's impossible, but a lot of people do know. And I think that the city, relative to this specific ordinance, has tried to push it out to businesses. We've talked to developers. I mean, a lot of people are already aware. And in addition, there's been, I mean, as we all know, this has been sort of in the works for years. And so I think all of us on staff, again, not high numbers, but I get comments like, oh, have you adopted dark sky lighting yet? You know, or what are we supposed to do with our lighting? And I will also say as well, for the developers that do work with us, you know, more frequently, we've been trying with what little we have, which frankly is not a lot, trying to encourage lighting levels that are more aligned with dark sky lighting in general. So for whatever that's worth, I do think there is a certain level of awareness about it, although certainly, you know, having some type of timeline is something that we could add as a condition of approval and would be, I don't think would affect the ordinance as it is itself, so.
I would just add, if council wants to have a delay, we'd look for a little direction on that. You know, I think potentially a 90-day up to, you know, maybe 3 months to 6 months. So maybe in that range, 90 to 180 days would be effective if you wanted to have some type of delay so that we had time to get the word out.
Thanks. That's helpful. And I do think that, well, maybe Councilmember Lay wants to comment, but to me that would help. Because I'm sure lots of folks have been paying attention, but I wouldn't want to assume that everybody is watching our discussion here tonight and is going to know that this ordinance is effective immediately.
Councilor Lay, did you have a comment directly to that point? Because I have Councilor Dickinson next. Councilor Dickinson.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, making sure I get what we're doing here. The narrative, so one thing that's going to happen with a lot of these things, right, is someone is going to have a little bit of the information, and what I'm going to hear tomorrow, you know, when we pass this, is like, oh my God, now what do you guys, now I have to change all my lights. It's like, well, no, okay, so this does not affect, let me just start with just commercial. This does not affect a current commercial building. There is no mandate to retrofit. There is no incentive to retrofit. There's no response to a complaint. Like that, nothing is going to change for our existing businesses unless they take action that creates, right? That is clear to everyone?
Correct.
Okay. And then, well, right, but so now, you know, no new business is going to want to come to Louisville because you got another, you know, red tape, another thing they have to do. And again, to that, it's like, so if I'm going to be a new tenant in a already existing building, let's say like the Lowe's building, I'm going to move into Lowe's. If I don't update the outside, I don't have to do anything about that parking lot. But if I redo the facade, I'm going to have to redo the entire parking lot light project, right?
If you have an addition of 25% or more, not if you update the facade of the building. Will it impact the parking lot lights specifically?
Not if I mean, obviously it's branded a certain way. I'm going to want to freshen it up. It's going to be a bowling alley. So I'm going to do this whole new thing on the outside, but that's not going to trigger a parking lot.
Right, that would
Help me
trigger-
understand that, because I thought is that just residential that it was 25%?
No, so it's 25, so it's dependent on whether it's building or whether you're triggering building-wide compliance or site-wide compliance.
So the site-wide, thank you.
The site-wide is the addition of square footage.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's very helpful. See, I'm getting some better answers. Okay, and so then otherwise, if someone wants to build something brand new, we're not I think the point you're making, those numbers are for retrofits, but the point you're making is there's not a huge delta to a brand new project with parking, with everything, with all the stuff. It's really a choice more than a major cost prohibitive thing to do the dark sky, right? So again, just trying to get these things across. So I'm feeling like I don't have a lot of opposition to this. Like, I don't think this is going to have some major negative impact on our community. I am concerned that it won't have much impact at all. And so that's not the worst thing, again, like kind of do no harm. I mean, like, it's probably not the worst, but I'm curious if this is what we do, and then we kind of put this to bed for a few years because, hey, we did dark sky initiative stuff, we're good, and then we don't do anything when really there are some big things we need to be doing. And so does doing this kind of check a box for us, and then maybe it doesn't have the impact we want it to have, and it's not on our agenda to do it? Like, could you imagine if staff well, what's in your work plan? Well, for 2024, dark skies. Like, what? Like, well, yeah, because we have more to do now. And like, we passed this thing without a whole lot of impact. And so I'm a little concerned that we're not going to see, because I think there are some people that have voiced through email otherwise that, like, you're not going far enough. This isn't enough. What you have put out there isn't going to have any impact. It's going to roll out too slowly. It's going to take decades to see this improvement, right? And it's like, oh, right. So we didn't go. So I think as I hope wrapping up, I think I'm willing to go forward with this. I guess I'm just curious if there's, I'm just really concerned that we're not going to take the next steps on bigger incentive programs or on, our streetlights or our parking lots that have no reason to retrofit. Like, I just don't know that this is going to have an impact. And I would like, I think our residents are hoping that we have an impact on their experience, right? Like, the light that goes into your room, nothing's changing, right? We got the letter from Mark Cathcart about the light that goes into his bedroom. Nothing's going to change. Like that, none of these things are going to change for these people, but the next light that gets put in will be better. And that's about it, all we're doing. So I guess that's it. I'm just not in love with this. But I'll probably vote for it because I don't think, and I'm obviously doing, this stream of consciousness thing, but I don't think it does a lot of harm, and so I can pass it, but I just don't think it does much good.
Thank you. Councilor Lay?
Yeah, I'm with Councilmember Most. I'm kind of confused. But I feel like I've been here before because I think the bar for passing regulation has to be more than, gee, I don't think it's going to do any harm. I think there is some good to come of it. I think there's no question that even in small places, we've got impacts on insects, and there's clearly some things that would get better. It's always a question when you're dealing with new regulations of whether it's worth it, or whether it's worth it yet, or whether we, require people to do it, or whether we incentivize them to do it. But I know in the past, we've passed things, and we've passed energy codes where we were like, okay, we're going to pass it, and then maybe we'll get some incentives, or maybe we'll figure it out. And I hate that. I mean, and I think people hate that. They expect more from us than that. And it's not that this isn't good. This is what I'm reminded of is one of our former council members used to say that it's not quite ready for prime time. And that's the way I'm kind of feeling about this. That I think with, I like the suggestion that Councilmember Hefner made, but the thing that really is gnawing at me a bit is that we are under enormous pressure right now, at least on the commercial side. We're getting a lot of feedback, and I think, I don't know whether the other two candidates for mayor are have an opinion about this, but I'm getting an enormous amount of feedback on economic vitality as being the thing that people are worried about. I was maybe a little surprised at how strong that is. Well, I think I understand what's going to happen with new businesses. It's not going to be a big deal. Current business is not a big deal. But if you're a business that's trying to expand, and that is a really important thing, we're trying to retain them, and they decide to expand, then we're hitting them with this. And that just gives me a little bit of pause. We say one thing, and we're potentially doing another. And that's where I'm really getting hung up. And I'd be interested in what my other fellow council members say about that. There definitely is some friction there, and I think the friction is going to hit those kinds of businesses the most. I have less concerns about residential, I really do. I'm just concerned about this one. And I don't know whether there's a way of like bumping up the amount of a change that it would take to trigger it. That's potentially one modification to be made. But I am worried about what this means to businesses that are trying to expand. Is that going to deter them or inhibit them?
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey? Oh, well, I put your hand up. Oh, thank you very much. Councilor Most.
So I appreciate the comments that Councilor Lay made. I am just, and Councilor Dickinson too. It's like, I guess that's how I kind of feel about this. Like it doesn't, on some level it impacts businesses that are expanding. And I wonder, if there's ways for the EBC to try to mitigate some of that with business assistance packages. If this is something that we really are committed to, then I think we should be willing to make sure that we're not penalizing just one class of businesses. This idea that, as Councilmember Dickinson said, well, it's not, I don't think it's going to hurt per se, but I don't know how much it's going to help. And I guess I feel like that's what's happening on the residential side. And on the business side, we're kind of isolating this. So, and I hear the, well, let's put this forward as a first step. But, again, it's true that if we're going to do these things, then there has to be some equity in terms of, from my perspective, who are impacting and how we're impacting them. And I do think there's a lot of ways, as the mayor said, to incentivize people to go do this too. So I still feel like I have no more clarity than I did when we started this conversation, almost 2 hours ago now? Like, it just seems to me, and I really want to say that I know the staff has done a ton of work on this, and I really appreciate all that work. I mean, clearly something that we have been trying to get done for a long time, but I still, I still am somewhat perplexed.
Thank you. Councilor Hamilton?
Thank you. I'll try to make this brief. I would encourage my fellow council members to not be paralyzed by perfection at this point. Sometimes you have to walk before you can run. The thing I would ask is for staff to focus on a few educational items out the gate as a follow-up to this, should it pass. I would ask that there be targeted education, continued education, it sounds like, for the families in the Marshall Fire Burn area, but also there's a lot of other residential projects throughout the city that are in progress or being planned. So target Marshall, but keep in mind we have other projects that could be impacted throughout the city. And then the second educational focus or evaluation I'd like to see is collaboration to investigate the business assistance program. Should it be expanded, or should we be having conversations about including upgrades such as this or sustainability efforts and retaining and attracting businesses so they know that we support those efforts as well. So those are just a few of my comments that I'll leave at that.
Are we prepared to close the discussion?
I'm close. I do have a question now from that is, how, so the Marshall Fire families, there's some that are done, they're living in their house, and that's obvious. This is at permit, right? So anyone who's already submitted a permit for their home, this is done. And so to Dietrich's point, potentially saying, okay, well, we have a 90-day or whatever delay here in implementation, because if I'm about to submit a permit, in a month, it may not have the right lighting in that, like I have to, it's a hurdle, right? And we're gonna hear that, like, you just create another hurdle for me because I'm a month behind my, neighbor. And then certainly the houses that get built 5 years from now, I think it's fine. It's like, okay, this has been in place for a long time. But I am concerned about the Marshall Fire people who are like submitting permits in the next 3 months. It feels like, oh wait, they got to do it. I feel like we're gonna get a request of, well, you're gonna allow Marshall Fire families not to, you're gonna exempt the Marshall Fire families from how to do this. Like, well, it's similar, and we're like right back in this really contentious conversation. So just wondering if there's a way tonight to think about that as far as maybe it's just a 90-day delay, or maybe I actually don't think we need a carve out for the Marshall Fire houses because it's not a big thing, but I think we need to be thoughtful of how this is gonna land for someone who's about to turn a permit in next month. And it just feels like another thing they have to do. So is there any suggestions from staff or from council on how to be mindful of that impact on the Marshall Fire families, or don't feel it's necessary?
Well, I feel like you answered that. If we pass this and had an implementation of January 1st or February, pick a date in the future that we feel is a long enough window, that's a potential way of doing it.
Okay.
So I'm gonna help bring this to a close. I'm gonna close the public hearing. Does anybody have a motion on this ordinance?
I move that we approve ordinance number 1858, Series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code by the addition of a new chapter 17.26 titled Outdoor Lighting, with the amendment that it not go into effect until January 1st of 2024.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Discussion? Councilor Hefner?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the motion if we could amend it to be a couple months past January, given it's the beginning of October.
So you're asking for a friendly amendment?
I'm making a motion to amend the motion that's on the table to move the date to March 1st. Do I have a second for March?
Do you accept the amendment?
I will accept the amendment.
Seconder accept the amendment?
I accept the amendment. I second.
Okay, other discussion?
March 1st, 2024.
Yeah, we'll remind everybody to talk into the microphone. Counselor Lay?
Hold on for just a second. I'm looking for the part of the ordinance that deals with the trigger for how, what percentage, the 25, is it 25% increase in the size of the?
Yes, so the non-conforming is 172630C. And then there's also definitions. I think the 25% is in the definition section.
Maybe I would propose a. Yes, I just did. Sorry about that. I would offer a friendly amendment to change the definition of substantial alteration to 50% or more of the exterior wall area, which I think would give relief to those businesses that are expanding, that I'm thinking of. Those are really much bigger expansions, and I think maybe the expectation might be you're more likely to want to get into compliance if you're really.
Are you offering that as a friendly amendment?
Yes, I am.
You accept a friendly amendment?
No.
So do you want to do a substitute motion, or do you accept that?
Yeah.
Yeah, what? That was an either or.
Oh, I didn't hear what the or was. I'll make a substitute motion to pass ordinance number 1858, series 2023, as offered, but with a change to the substantial alteration to read changes to 50% or more of the exterior wall area or materials, excluding roofing of an existing building, which changes do not result in a substantial demolition. Substantial addition or redevelopment, and also to change the definition of substantial addition on residential also to 50% in the two places where it's mentioned as 25%.
Just for your consideration, what about the timing of the implementation?
I would adopt also the suggestion that Councilmember Hefner had made earlier, which is what, 3 months? I
March
think?
1st.
March 1st. Yep. That's my motion.
Okay, is there a second?
Can I ask a question before a second? Do I need a second in order to get clarification?
I think you can make a comment before you second.
I just want to be clear in layman's terms, there's the addition that we were talking about, like an actual addition to the space, which creates a site-wide improvement, and then there's the just the facade piece that creates it, upgrade of the building lighting. Are you talking about site-wide or just the building? Which one were you working on, or both?
Why don't we all look at the same?
Yeah, it's
right?
on page 34.
It's on page 34, near the bottom, where it says substantial addition, and there's both a non-residential and a residential. And he is proposing changing the 25% in both cases to 50%. Is that correct, staff?
Yes.
So there's no differentiation there.
I'm not seeing the substantial addition for residential.
So page 34, non-residential.
I think the mayor just said there's one for residential, and I don't think there is.
I did say that.
No,
So
do I need to go to the main packet?
can staff help us understand that? Shouldn't there be a definition for both?
So the way it's drafted now, any residential addition requires site-wide compliance. So we don't have a definition for substantial addition for residential.
Thank you for the clarification. Do you accept that, or you have a question?
Well, I would just suggest to the, to Councilmember Way, whose motion it is, that we might want to consider adding a substantiality qualifier for residential as well, if we're going to have this discussion, but I leave that to you.
Are you, well, I don't think we have a second yet.
I'll be your second.
So are you offering a friendly amendment?
At your discretion, Councilman.
I'm all for entertaining. If I hear it, I may second it. Why don't you make a friendly amendment?
Yeah, so I guess if we're going to have this conversation, I am not as attached to what the particular threshold is, but I do have reservations about imposing a 50% for commercial and any addition threshold for residential, which seems pretty divergent. And I wonder if we should consider having the same materiality threshold regardless. And I'm happy to entertain your 50% suggestion, but I'm not sure if we have a majority in favor of that.
So if you look at page 35, the substantial alteration, I think that's what the director was referring to. What if that was 50%? Wouldn't that cover your
I defer to
concern?
the director, but I don't think it covers residential.
So I think what we would have to do to make that change is just to say substantial addition, non-residential, and residential, and then change the percent to 50%. Right, because is that what you're saying? That you would like the 50% addition of square footage to also apply to the residential? That they'd have that higher threshold?
Yes, I think that's what I'm saying, although I wouldn't say I'm married to the 50%. I just think that there is some reason behind the idea that we have the same threshold for every type of development and not one for residential and one for commercial.
So I think you have the option, if you feel that way, to offer a friendly amendment to Councilor Lay's motion.
Yeah, sure, I would, you know, in the interest of compromise, offer the amendment of doing 30% across the board.
I'll second it just for the purpose of.
Do you accept a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
And you you seconded it? Okay, and you accept your friendly amendment? Okay, any other discussion?
The concern that I have about that, I'll just say it, is that I think there is a difference between residential. I think we may kill it with, I mean, we were a minute ago just talking about residential as being something that I think we were all relatively comfortable with or getting comfortable with. I don't have as much heartburn about drawing a distinction between the residential and the non-residential. I mean, I'm accepting the friendly amendment if only just to talk about that. But I think I'd like to hear what other council members might say about that. I'm very interested. Maybe what I'm saying is I don't accept the friendly amendment. Actually, that's what I'm saying.
So I guess I'm not used to rescinding acceptance of a friendly amendment. Is that what you just did?
Yeah, I'm rescinding acceptance of a friendly amendment.
How do we do that?
Could I make a suggestion?
Hang on a second.
You know, Mayor, it's really your discretion as the presiding officer. You know, I think it might be more clear for somebody to make a fresh motion at this point so that everybody understands.
Thank you for the counsel on that, Counselor. Counselor Lay, can you restate your substitute motion?
All right, the substitute motion would be to move to pass ordinance number 1858, series 2023, with the following changes. In the definition of substantial addition non-residential, it would be 50% in each of the instances where 25% currently is. And to change substantial alteration, the 25% would be 50%.
And the timing?
The same March 1st, 2024.
Is there a second? Okay, well, seeing no second, could we take a roll call on the first motion, please?
Mayor, can we get clarification on the first motion? I'm lost a little bit.
I think that's an excellent idea. So the motion is to pass the ordinance as written with an implementation of March 1st, 2024. The roll call, please.
Councilmember Most?
I'm going to abstain.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner?
No.
Councilmember Lay?
No.
Mayor Maloney?
No.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
It's 3-3, which means it would go down.
That's the vote. All right, so 3-3, the measure does not pass, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene at 8:15. We're back in session. So the next item is regular business B, ordinance number 1859, series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of Louisville Municipal Code by creating a new section 1716-350, establishing procedures and criteria for concept plan review. And this is the second reading and the public hearing. I'll open the public hearing for this and ask our director for a presentation.
All right, well, good evening, Mayor Maloney, members of the City Council, Rob Zuccaro with city staff. I'll be making the presentation on this ordinance proposal. So concept plan reviews. So this is also known as a sketch plan. They're basically the same idea. This is something that council has had on its work plan this year. What this is it's providing a preliminary, it would be an optional in this case, preliminary step as we're proposing it in the development review process. So this provides an applicant an opportunity to get in front of City Council and get some preliminary feedback. It is very intentionally meant to be non-binding. It's meant to be for more complex cases, so you're not going to be seeing every single lot PUD. It's for more complex cases. And then it gives council and a potential applicant the opportunity to identify issues, areas of interest or concern from City Council. This is, again, intentionally not intended to replace the process for developing actual city policies and standards for development, so you should be reacting to city policies. Oftentimes there are gray areas or maybe even conflicting policies, so that's where this type of process can be most helpful and provide clarification on that. You know, this is a process where council wouldn't be voting or taking straw polls even. It's really just individual input, but there's a lot that you could learn and a potential applicant can learn on this. So the type of applications, it's pretty broad. So there's some information about comparable communities that do these types of things. We're proposing actually a pretty broad application type. General development plans is a big one because those really, those are master planning concepts for larger parcels. So that's probably the most obvious application type where this could be helpful. PUDs, planned unit developments, but only when there's multiple lots or height or density waivers. So those are pretty important policy topics. Special review uses, so when it's not a use by right, but a conditional use that you have discretion on. And then the last two items are comprehensive plan amendments or zoning map amendments or text amendments, but only if they're specific to a property. So it's not a general policy change, but somebody who's looking at a potential property, but there's not comprehensive plan alignment or an issue with the zoning text or map that you might want to provide some feedback on. So again, this is a preliminary step. It's anticipated to be, we want it to be quick. We don't want to add significant time to the development review process. We did meet with lots of commercial property owners, landowners, developers. We got some feedback. Certainly one of the things we heard was we want this to be quick. We're anticipating a 1 to 2 month process. Staff would not be providing code analysis, but we might provide summaries of plans and policies that you may want to consider in your feedback. The applicant would submit narratives, preliminary plans. We have that all outlined in the code. Character sketches, no lighting plans would be submitted. It's not a requirement. That would take place at the PUD level. There would be public notice. So I think one of the benefits for council and the potential applicant is to hear from the public early on as well. Again, you can ask questions. There would be individual comments. The record would be the minutes. There would be no votes or resolutions again. It's really important that council would enter into these processes not prejudging the application. That needs to be part of the actual public hearing process that would take place later for these land use applications. There's a few communities that we provided you background information on. There's a range of whether it's required or optional. Again, we're proposing it to be optional. There's a range of if planning commission or city council reviews it. We're proposing not having a planning commission step, but just a city council step. And then most cities require some form of public notice that we looked at as well. So Planning Commission looked at this. They are recommending approval as drafted. Staff's recommending approval as drafted as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on his presentation? Seeing none, we're going to go to public. Oh, I'm sorry. Her hand's been up for a while. Councilor Most, your hand's been up for a while. Councilor Dickinson?
Just curious if there's any harm in having, or why not all PUDs, since it's not required, that like maybe there's a PUD that doesn't have multiple lots, whatever, that does want to do this and they actually literally can't because they have to fit into a certain one? Like, what was the reasoning behind being specific there?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few reasons. I think the main one is that really these types of processes are for those more complex, policy-heavy type of developments. The vast majority of our single lot PUDs are really just about meeting the design standards or asking for waivers from design standards, which are often, things like lot coverage. And I think that may not be the best use of city council resource and time or staff resource and time, because they're more site design issues. So we reserved it only for those that have, more important policy issues that council may need to give feedback on.
Yeah. Councilor Hamilton?
Can you estimate how many of these per year you think would fall on our agenda?
I would say it might be, in the first year, there might be more. So I'm gonna, before I answer that directly, I'm gonna say I think as we go through updating our comprehensive plan and perhaps updating our policies, especially land use policies in the comprehensive plan, there may be less need once we get the comprehensive plan adopted. There might be more clarity for potential developers. Up until that time, I'm gonna just throw out a number of maybe 4 to 6 per year that you might see applications like this. We are a fairly built out city. We don't have a lot of the bigger, more complex land use applications that might qualify for this.
Okay. I asked that question because I'm curious why we chose the council-only route and not the Planning Commission. I know there was some discussion of this in some of the minutes in the packet.
The primary reason is to keep the process, well, I'd say there's 2 reasons. One is to try to keep the process as short as possible. I think that's really important. And also, a lot of those gray areas of policy, I think it's imperative that council weigh in on that more than the Planning Commission. I think the Planning Commission would rely on the record of those concept plan reviews as well and saying, well, what does council think this policy means, or what direction do they think it should go in relation to city's policies?
Okay, that's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I think we're going to go to public comment at this point in time. So this is the first round of public comment. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Please tell us your name and if you're a Louisville resident. And first up is Joshua Cooperman.
Josh Cooperman, I live in Louisville. Just going to make a brief comment. I'm very supportive of this idea of a concept review. I think it will be beneficial not only for businesses and developers who are coming to the city, but also for residents who would like a preview of possible future developments. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, I have Andy Johnson, but I don't see him in the room. Okay, so is there anyone on Zoom that would like to comment on this topic? Seeing none, we'll come back to council questions. Discussion? Counselor Dickinson?
Thank you, staff. I think this is something that I know I've been really excited about for a couple of years. Really looking forward to seeing how this plays out if we pass it, and that we can, have some good meetings and good conversations with people that are trying to follow our policies and trying to do something here and do it the way that we want them to do it. So I'm really excited about this. I think this is a huge step forward in our interfacing with that community and having it be public, because I think that was one of the big things is it's not that we want to have like secret conversations. We want it to be part of the public process, and I think you've designed a nice way to do this that's simple and quick, and hopefully gets real conversation happening early on, and gets projects coming forward, because I think that's been a real problem is like, I don't know if we can spend a year and a half and $1 million to find out what they even are thinking as far as the plausibility of it. So I'm in total support of this and excited to vote yes.
Counselor Lay?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to Rob and his staff for putting this together, because this is something that I think is long overdue, and I think it'll be an extraordinarily helpful tool, both for the community and for us and for the applicants as well.
Thank you. Any other comment? Counselor Hefner?
I completely agree with my colleagues. Thank you.
Counselor Most?
Yeah, I just want to say that also I'm really enthusiastic about this. I'm hoping, along with updates that we're going to, hopefully make to the ordinances and zoning post the comprehensive plan, that this is just going to make things much easier and smoother. And I would hope that perhaps maybe we'll get these, and then the proposals won't even need to come back to the council, because they'll just be compliant. And I think that would probably make everybody a lot happier and more comfortable with development in our community.
Thank you. Counselor Hamilton?
Yes, thank you. I think this is long overdue, like some of my colleagues have mentioned, and I very much appreciate what you've presented today to really position the city as a partner with developers and businesses seeking to join our community. And so I'm happy to support this.
I'm just going to quickly weigh in as well. Thank you, Director, for the presentation. And I know this is something that you've presented to City Council over the years, and we're finally getting it done. So one of the things I really appreciate was your slide on the application types. As you noted, the City of Louisville is pretty built out, and really what we'll be looking at is repurposing, or whatever the right term is, and what are those possibilities that make sense for the City of Louisville? And so, as Councilor Dickinson said, rather than spending a year and a half and spending $1 million to get a what if, at least you'll get some sense if it's something that, the city has interest in, knowing that we still need to go through the processes, and we're certainly not interrupting that. Councilor Lay?
Yeah, we ready for a motion?
No, we need to go through the second round of public comment, but I appreciate your urgency to get this passed. So we'll go to the second round of public comments. Anyone in the chamber? No? Anyone on Zoom? No? Coming back to Counselor Lay?
I would move for passage of ordinance number 1859, Series 2023, an ordinance amending Title 17 of the Louisville Municipal Code by creating new Section 17.16.350, establishing procedures and criteria for a concept plan review.
Second.
Discussion? We're having a race here?
Yeah.
Any discussion? Okay, we will now close the public hearing. We have a motion, so let's take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Most,
Yes.
Mayor Maloney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey, Councilmember Lay.
Yes.
The motion for ordinance number 1859 passes. We'll move on to regular business C, ordinance number 1860, series 2023, an ordinance repealing the prohibition of pit bulls contained in section 6.12.160 of the Louisville Municipal Code. This is the second reading, and this is the public hearing. So I will open the public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight is a proposed ordinance that would remove from the city's code the prohibition of the ownership, possession, keeping, exercising control over, maintaining, harboring, transporting, and sale of pit bulls within the city. It does not affect the rest of the code related to animals, so there is still a vicious animal section of the code that can still be enforced should that be needed for a dog. The ban was initially instituted in 1994, and as far as staff knows, we are the only city that continues to have a breed-specific legislation such as this in our code. Tickets are rarely issued from the court, and they are sometimes hard to enforce as well. Current information and practice is that breed-specific legislation is really not effective, and it is an owner's responsibility to make sure their dog is safe and maintained and trained well. Staff is recommending approval of the ordinance this evening.
Thank you. Any questions for the city clerk? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the first round of public comments. Anyone in the chambers wish to make a comment? Anyone on Zoom wish to make a comment? All right, that closes the first round of public comments. Councilor Most.
Yeah, so I appreciate that we're doing this. I, was one of the people that actually initially raised dog issues to get onto the work plan. And my only concern is that when this was initially considered, it was considered as a part of the package of looking at enforcement for off-leash dogs and aggressive dogs. And the problems I think we really have is that we don't enforce our dog registration. And I think because we really ought to know what dogs have had their all the dogs in town should have vaccinations. Like, I'm okay with repealing this, but I do think we have a broader issue about that we really have no idea how many dogs we have. The last time I asked Meredith, the city clerk, she told me there were less than 500 dogs registered. We have thousands of dogs in this town, and we don't know if they're up to date in their vaccinations. So I just want to raise that as a flag and say, I'm fine with doing this, but I do think that there's another issue, and it's really a health and safety issue for our community that ought to be considered.
Thank you. Councilor Dickinson.
Thank you to staff. I think this was maybe the first conversation I had with Mayor Stolzman was in 2019 was, oh my God, how do we get rid of this? And every year, for good reason, there have been more important topics with COVID and the marsh fire and all that, and it kept getting pushed. And I think part of the reason we got it through this time is because we aren't addressing everything we can address, but we are addressing this one issue that I think has been frustrating for me that this has been on the books. So I'm so happy that all those people that have emailed me over the last 4 years asking why, and I say, no, we're gonna do it. There's nobody opposed to this. We're gonna do it. On council at least. I always got that opinion. Sorry, I should not speak to what your positions might be. I'm really looking forward to this repeal.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll go to the second round of public comments. Anyone on Zoom? All right. Come back to council for discussion, motions.
I'd like to make a motion. I move that we pass ordinance number 1860, series 2023, an ordinance repealing the prohibition on pit bulls contained in section 612.160 of the Louisville Municipal Code.
Second.
Discussion? Okay. We will close the public hearing. Call for a roll call vote, please.
Mayor Maloney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner,
Yes.
Councilmember Most,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. It passes on a 7-0 vote. We'll move on to regular business ordinance number 1861, series 2023, an ordinance amending section 2.67.020 of the Louisville Municipal Code, reducing the membership of the Recreation Advisory Board. This is the second reading and the public hearing. And we have a presentation from our city clerk, and we're open for business.
At the June 20th City Council meeting, council members discussed the roles and duties of various city boards and commissions. The direction that came out of that meeting is this and the next two ordinances as well. One of the items council gave direction to staff to was to standardize the size of most of the boards to 7 members. To that end, the proposed ordinance would reduce the size of the Recreation Advisory Board from its existing 9 members to 7 members. The board currently has a number of vacancies, so reducing the size of the board will not affect its current membership, and staff recommends approval.
Thank you. Any questions for the city clerk? All right, first round of public comments. Anybody on Zoom? No council comments? We will have 2 rounds of public comment, so it looks like nobody has comments at this point in time. I will make one comment. This was also reducing to 7 was a recommendation of this particular board. So we'll go on to the second round of public comments. Anyone out there? No. We'll come back to council discussions, motions. Councilor Hefner.
I would move the passage of ordinance number 1861, series 2023, an ordinance amending section 2.67.020 of the Louisville Municipal Code, reducing the membership on the Recreation Advisory Board.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. We'll call roll call vote, please.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Lay?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Mayor Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Thank you. It passes unanimously. The next item is item regular business E, Arts and Culture Advisory Board. We have both an ordinance and a resolution. I'll read them both, but we will have to take motions separately on those. So ordinance number 1862, series 2023, an ordinance amending chapter 2.20 of the Louisville Municipal Code concerning the Arts and Culture Advisory Board. This is the second reading and the public hearing. And in addition, we have resolution number 59, series 2023, a resolution concerning membership and duties of the Arts and Culture Advisory Board. We'll open the public hearing and ask the city clerk for a lengthy presentation.
Very lengthy, yes. Also coming out of the June 20th City Council meeting, council gave direction to staff to clarify the duties of certain boards and rename some of them to clearly identify them as advisory boards. This proposed ordinance renames the Cultural Council as the Arts and Culture Advisory Board. It also codifies the board into the municipal code, which we have been negligent in doing for a few of our boards, so this was a chance to do that. The corresponding resolution establishes the powers, duties, and responsibilities of that renamed Arts and Culture Advisory Board, and staff recommends approval of both of them.
Thank you. Any questions for the city clerk? Seeing none. Any public comments? Seeing none. Come back to the first round of discussion by council. Seeing none, we go to second round of public comment. You're making this really easy on me. Seeing none. Go back to council discussion or motions.
I'll make a motion that we approve ordinance 1862, series 2023, an ordinance amending chapter 2.20 of the Louisville Municipal Code concerning the Arts and Culture Advisory Board.
Second.
So.
One at a time, right?
Can we make both motions?
You're do one at a time.
Okay, but I need to close the public hearing. Close the public hearing. Let's take a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Mayor Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Lay?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Do we have a motion on the resolution?
Move the passage of resolution number 59, series 2023, a resolution concerning membership and duties of the Arts and Culture Advisory Board.
Second.
Discussion? We have a roll call vote, please.
You can do a voice vote.
What?
You can do a voice vote.
Oh, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes 7-0. Next is regular item F, Historical Museum Advisory Board. There's an ordinance and a resolution here as well. Ordinance number 1863, series 2023, an ordinance amending chapter 2.20 of the Louisville Municipal Code concerning a Historical Museum Advisory Board. This is the second reading and the public hearing. In addition, there's resolution number 60, series 2023, a resolution concerning membership and duties of the Historical Museum Advisory Board. And our city clerk has another lengthy presentation.
Everything you did for the last one, you're now doing for the Historical Commission, changing the name of the Historical Commission to the History Museum Advisory Board, and the resolution would establish its duties and membership.
Wow, you made that too short. I didn't open the public hearing yet. First round of public comments. All right. Council discussion. Second round of public comments. All right, back to city council for discussions, motions.
I'll move that we approve ordinance number 1863, series 2023, an ordinance amending chapter 2.20 of the Louisville Municipal Code concerning the Historical Museum Advisory Board.
Second.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. Any discussion on the ordinance? We have a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Councilmember Lay?
Yes.
Mayor Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Do I have a motion on resolution number 60?
Sure. Move that we approve resolution number 60, series 2023, a resolution concerning membership and duties of the Historical Museum Advisory Board.
Second.
Discussion? This will be a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 7-0. Thank you very much. Next is regular item G, ordinance number 1864, series 2023, an ordinance approving rezoning of Lot 10, Block 1, and Outlot 1 of Delo Lofts final subdivision plat from commercial community CC to mixed-use residential MU-R, and approving an amendment to Exhibit A, Land Use Plan Exhibit, referencing in Louisville Municipal Code, Chapter 17.14, mixed-use districts. This is the first reading, and the purpose to set the public hearing. So I make a motion to approve ordinance number 1864. We have a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that passes. Now is regular item H, ordinance number 1865, series 2023, an ordinance amending chapter 3.23 of the Louisville Municipal Code regarding the city's tax and fee business assistance program. This is first reading to set the public hearing for October 17th, 2023. I'm making a motion to pass this ordinance. Do I have a second?
Second.
We'll have a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Next up, we have an executive session. I'm going to ask the city attorney to introduce the item, and then we'll request the executive session.
Thank you, Mayor. As noted on the meeting agenda, the city manager and I are requesting an executive session for the purpose of consultation with an attorney representing the city with respect to pending litigation pursuant to Section 5-2D of the city's Home Rule Charter and CRS Section 246402-4B. Prior to entertaining any motion, the city clerk will read a statement required by the city code.
It is the policy of the city to conduct public business in meetings open to the public. While in executive session, it is inappropriate to take straw votes, keep minutes, or make any final decisions. It is the duty of each council member to ensure executive sessions are conducted in strict compliance with this ordinance, state and federal law, and any applicable provisions of the state and federal constitutions. If at any time the scope, nature, or parameter of this executive session goes beyond this publicly stated topic, it is the responsibility of the city council to terminate and cease any further deliberation within the executive session and return to the public meeting. Only those topics described in city ordinances may be discussed in an executive session. Those topics are summarized as follows. Where federal or state law requires the information being discussed remain confidential, certain personnel matters involving only employees directly appointed by the city council and other personnel matters upon request of the city manager or mayor, consideration of water rights and real property acquisitions and dispositions, but only as to appraisals, value estimates, and strategy, and legal consultation with an attorney representing the city with respect to pending litigation.
Regarding the authority for the executive session, Section 5-2D authorizes an executive session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation. An executive session for this purpose is also authorized by the Open Meetings Law, Section 246402(4)B of the Colorado Revised Statute. The request involves discussion of potential litigation regarding the Marshall Fire. With that, Mayor, you can entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Thank you. I move to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation in a personnel matter involving an employee directly appointed by the city council, and that the executive session also include City Manager Jeff Durbin, Deputy City Manager Sama Fox, and City Attorney Kathleen Kelly. We have a roll call for this motion.
I need a second.
Second.
So we need 5 votes. Okay.
Councilmember Lay? Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Mayor Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Councilor Lay has just come back into the chambers.
Councilmember Lay, would you like to vote?
All right, the city council will now adjourn to executive session.
recipes. It's really depressing when you're still here at 9:30.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, as noted on the meeting agenda, the executive session was for the purpose of discussing pending litigation, and the City Council had such discussion. We request at this time the City Council provide some direction or take some kind of action.
Discussion?
I have a motion.
Okay.
I move to authorize the mayor to sign a letter informing the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management that the city does not authorize it to respond to FEMA on its behalf, with its conclusion regarding whether it is commercially reasonable to pursue reimbursement from a third party with respect to the Marshall Fire.
And Councilor Lay seconded. Discussion?
You want to speak in favor of your motion?
Yeah, thanks. You know, without getting into the details of what we discussed in executive session, the state has asked us to respond to a letter they sent to us addressing a letter they had received from FEMA with respect to FEMA's disaster assistance for the Marshall Fire, and the state has asked us to give our opinion as to whether we believe it's commercially reasonable to pursue reimbursement from a third party, being Excel or Public Service Company of Colorado, with respect to the Marshall Fire. And so my motion is to inform the state that we believe it may be commercially reasonable to do so.
Others? Councilor Dickinson?
Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned that we're going to be spending a lot of time and resources on this case, which may be very difficult to prove all of the components of it, all the way to a financial award. And then that financial award will not necessarily be to our benefit, it'll be to paying FEMA back. So I'm just a little concerned that it, that it puts us in a long process that could cost us a lot and not benefit us a lot. So that's my concern.
Other thoughts? Councilor Lay?
Yeah, and if, at the same time, though, if we don't do this, we could face a situation where we end up getting dinged by FEMA for not pursuing something, given some of the evidence that we do know is out there that it actually augurs in favor of liability, at least based on what we think we know, which we probably shouldn't talk too specifically about. But So for that reason, I think I would probably, I think it is commercially reasonable. I could support the motion.
I agree. I think it's commercially reasonable too. And I think that, you know, we as policymakers for the city of Louisville need to be looking at the long term on this. And where I agree with you, it's going to take a lot of staff time. It's going to take a lot of city attorney time. And we don't know how long this is going to play out. This could be a lawsuit that could be many years. Especially given all the players. And, you know, we have FEMA, we have our insurance companies, we have the state, we have the community foundation that have funded things, but this will be a burden. But I think that, you know, if we're thinking about what can we do to try to mitigate wildfires into the city of Louisville, this and other things that we'll need to do in the future and future councils. It could be that, you know, it's no one on the current council that sees this to fruition. But I think this is the right step to be taking at this point in time. And so I agree with the motion as well. Councilor Dickinson.
I guess one other thing I will say, you know, kind of was brought to my attention that, you know, FEMA did give us a ton. Like they stepped in and really supported us. And if a third party is responsible and financially responsible, and that money can go back to FEMA so they can support the next community. That's not the worst result, certainly if that's where we end up, if there is a verdict in our favor, if we do actually get something, even if it goes to paying back the people that helped us out, I can get behind that.
Any other discussion? Are we ready to vote? Do we roll call? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Hefner?
Yes.
Mayor Maloney?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Lay?
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Fahey?
Yes.
Councilmember Most?
Yes.
Thank you for being here, Councilor Most. City Attorney's report.
I have no report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Council comments, committee reports, and identification of future agenda items. Councilor Dickinson.
I just want to make sure that we're making some progress on an issue that we brought up several weeks ago around the smoke damaged houses and the potential for either use tax rebates, the similar programs that we did for the completely destroyed homes. There are some homes that have been basically completely destroyed, but in a different way that has actually been more painful, more expensive, and longer for some people than expected. And I felt like we had pretty clear direction to staff that was something that we wanted to see, but I don't know that if that direction really is clear, or if they need to bring something back to us to officially move on to the next step. But I think we're kind of in this limbo of like nothing is changing, and yet I thought we were kind of marching down the road of doing something for the really intensely fire affected homes, those that have been basically gutted and are still not inhabited yet. Is that something that we want to bring back and see as a council, or?
City Manager, do you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I can't tell if Director Zaccaro is still in the room. Is he?
He's not.
Nope. I'm seeing shaking heads. Yes, his department has been working on this. It's just a matter really of, we heard the direction on a program for use tax rebates for smoke damaged homes, basically insulation permits. There was about 1,600 of those. And his department has been working on gathering data to understand the scope of that, the different types of impacts, and so that they can, that's kind of some baseline data to bring a program back for council consideration. The piece about building code waivers is, I may have missed that earlier. If that's something you want us to consider, we could add that into that component. I think the vast majority of folks in that category have already completed the work. So I'm not sure of the scope of benefit to a program like that, but we'd have to do the work on the analysis there. And I guess the question really is would you like to make this a higher priority than some of the other items that planning and building is working on right now? They've got a lot on their plate, as you know, with the rebuild, and we are getting, I'm hoping we can get one more planning staff member on board here real soon, get them back up to full staff and have that capacity to do this, in more work. So really the question, I suppose, that I would ask is, would council like to make this a higher priority than perhaps some other items? And I'd have to talk to Rob about what that would look like as far as prioritization.
So, City Manager, you asked two questions. One is clarification on codes.
Yep.
Councilor Dickinson, can you clarify that comment?
Yeah, what I thought we had stated, and so great to check in and see if this is how the other people felt, just that the same thing we set up for totally destroyed homes could apply to any of the fire destroyed homes with the same, needing to claim that you are underinsured. Like, so it basically in order to get the 2018 codes, right, in order to get a use tax rebate, you had to say that you were either, they were both complicated, but basically you had to say you're underinsured. And you had to do a test to that, and you had to sign something saying, I am underinsured. So if somebody had their insulation redone in their attic, I don't think they're gonna be able to check that box to say they were underinsured. So this is going to only work for people who really had a major issue, and so just extend it, just fill this out, check that box, and check the box says you're underinsured, and you're just like any of the other fire victims. Like, it's not a new program. It's not, you don't have to define how much destroyed. You have to be underinsured and show that and attest to that. And so that was my thought, is that it was actually very simple. It was just let those people fill out the same paperwork, but not a whole new program with new measurements. So that's where I thought we were going, and obviously we're not. That is not what staff heard. And so if it needs to come back to us, if we need to have a bigger discussion, because we're not supposed to, we're not trying to figure it out here. I thought something would be coming back to us quickly for us to be like, yeah, that's great, that's what we wanted.
Councilor Most?
Yeah, I initially had raised this, and when we talked about this, my request was that we look at anybody who had smoke damage, and there are people who are underinsured. I know people who are, you'd think it's just insulation, but they're still fighting with their insurance companies and they're still not covered. So that was my request when I initially made this request, that we extend the use tax waivers to anybody under the same circumstances who was doing work on their home because of the fire.
So, City Manager, at the next meeting, can you give us an update of status?
Yeah, and I understand the intent behind this. I think really the question is, would council like to make this a higher priority? So I think the question that we'll work on is, what might we have to slow down a little bit to get capacity to pull this off quicker? So I'll get with Director Zaccaro the next couple of days and work on something for you.
Okay, other items? Seeing none, we're adjourned.
Eventually ruled that Pullman was, in fact, in restraint of trade and needed to divest itself of one of its business lines. They either had to give up the manufacturing business or the operation of the sleeping cars. Pullman chose to remain in the manufacturing business, and they spun off the operations business to a consortium of the railroads that actually were running the cars.
Robert Young wanted to control the Pullman Company and buy it, but the railroads did not want him to own the company.
So